Coming up, Mitch from the Video Vacuum is going to be on. We're going to be looking at The Dragon Lives Again, a Brucesploitation film. And keep in mind, when we recorded this episode, it was before Severin announced that they are releasing Brucesploitation films, including this one, The Dragon Lives Again, in upcoming box set release. But I think you may even be able to get them individually as well. But yeah, so when we're talking about the movie, we're saying you can only get it on YouTube because at the time it was that. I think there was also a Spanish language version on Tubi, but that's, again, before Severin announced that they were releasing the film. So just keep that in mind as you're listening. Then next week, Ty from Comeuppance is back on, and in honor of Eric Roberts' birthday on the 18th, the episode will air on the 16th, of course, but on the 18th, is Eric Roberts' birthday. We're going to be doing two Asylum Eric Roberts films, Top Gunner and then Top Gunner America versus Russia. So those would be fun. I'm trying to think how much Asylum we've done on the site before. I know we covered Mercenaries way back in the old episodes with Jamie and I. We did that film. I feel like there's a few Asylums, but we haven't done a lot lately, so this will be an interesting one. And of course, Eric Roberts, we don't do him as often on the site either, so that should be a fun one. And then in 2 weeks, first time a guest on the podcast, Chris from Bulletproof Action is going to be on. We're going to be looking at American Ninja 2, so that'll be a fun one. The Dudikov classic. And Dudikov's another one we haven't done a lot on the podcast. I know Ty and Brett from Comeuppance, we did a couple. We did a Dudikov list, and then an unsung Dudikov list, and then Will from Exploding Helicopter was on when we were talking about virtual reality films. We looked at Virtual Assassin. That was one of the virtual reality films we looked at. But I can't think of other times that we've discussed Dudikov on the site. So this will be fun. And of course, American Ninja 2 is a classic. And of course, Chris from Bulletproof, I've been wanting to have him on for a bit. Anyway, I've done a few things with their site. We did a Ninja movie list, Albert Pyun movie list. I think we did a Don the Dragon Wilson. I think it was a Blood Fist list actually. So I've done a few collaborations with them, but it was fun to have him on. It was a really fun conversation. So that'll be in 2 weeks' time. Later this week, DTVC Extra is back. We're going to continue to look at the Predator franchise with Alien vs. Predator and Alien vs. Predator Requiem. So both of those are on Hulu. I've watched them. They're in the can. I'm just sort of gathering my thoughts to record that one. That'll be on Thursday. I'll post that one. It'll be an interesting conversation, right? Because the first two Predators are such classics that, and these aren't necessarily classics, but there's a lot that we can dig into and discuss with them. And then I'm not sure 2 weeks after that if I'm going to do the three remaining Predator films I'll have after that, which I think will be Predators, The Predator, and Prey, right? Because again, for whatever reason, I know Sean Malloy brought this up on his recent podcast as well, that for whatever reason we can't. His podcast is I Must Break This Podcast. For some reason we can't say number 2, right? We can't say part 2 or anything 2 anymore. It has to be a name or a different way of saying the name or something when we do sequels to movies. So I'm not sure why that is. It's interesting, like Marvel Cinematic Universe does that, right? And of course, their most successful franchises that they have outside of the Avengers are Iron Man, right? Which is Iron Man 1, Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3. Just Iron Man, right? We're not like American Kickboxer 1, American Kickboxer 2, but Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3. And then Guardians of the Galaxy, which they do volume, right? Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, based off of the mixtapes that Star-Lord has, but it's still a number, right? So it's interesting that the two most successful for them, outside of the Avengers ones, have numbers for the sequels, right? So that when you get cute with these sequels, I don't know, but everybody's got to do it, right? Everybody's got to be cute with the sequels, right? The Batman movies. Was that where it started? Maybe with Tim Burton's Batman's, right? Where it's Batman Returns, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin. Was that where we first started doing that? Because Superman, we had no problem with it, right? Star Wars, right? We had no problem. Though interesting, right? With Star Wars, right? We were doing 4, 5, and 6 to start with, right? Instead of 1, 2, and 3. But still, right? There's still numbers there. They use Roman numerals, but I don't know why that is. But anyway, so with Predator, we'll be doing Predator Requiem, because again, it can't be Alien versus Predator 2, right? It has to be Alien versus Predator Requiem. And then, we'll complete with the Predator, is it Predators, The Predator, I think that's the order they go in. Because that's the other thing, right? If you don't use numbers, having to figure out which one came before the other one. But anyway, so that's what we'll be doing. I think I might just put all 3 movies together into one. That's in 2 weeks' time. Just put them all into one instead of stretching it out over 2 episodes. And then, which franchise will come next? I'm not sure. One I was considering was Alien, because there's a little bit of that dovetail there, and those are all available on streaming. Most on Hulu, but some on, I think one or two are on HBO Max. So that was another consideration I have. So we'll see. We'll see what I end up doing for a franchise after I'm finished up with Predator. And then in terms of the site, I'm going to finally review Paradise City. So remember Ty and I covered that one on a podcast episode. It was... Bruce Willis, Travolta, Stephen Dorff was in it as well. So we're going to finally make that one happen. And then One Ranger. So get some more Jesse V. Johnson on the site. I'm not sure where he sits in terms of director numbers, but he's moving up the charts, right? He's moving up the list of all-time tags for directors. Of course, nobody's really going to touch Pion. I think Albert Pion has like 43, I think, just as a director, because keep in mind that he was producer on Nemesis 5, and then Dollman versus Demonic Toys, he had archive footage, so I don't really consider that necessarily. I mean, he did direct the archive footage, but I don't necessarily consider that a director film for him. So he's got 43, and then I think Fred Olen Ray has 15, right? So you got a gap of about 28 between first and second. But that's where Jesse V. Johnson's starting to move up the list, right? He's closing in on Fred Olen Ray's second. Some other directors that would have bigger numbers would be like Keone Waxman, right? Obviously with the work that he did with Seagal, right? That covers most of it. But a few films that he's done without Seagal, for example, Sweepers, right? With Dolph Lundgren, not to be confused with The Sweeper, right? Or the PM classic, See Thomas Howell, but Sweepers, Keone Waxman. Apparently he didn't have a great time. Him and Dolph didn't hit it off too well, but which is interesting because he works really well with Seagal. He seems to get the best out of Seagal. Another one I think was it was called The Hard Way. I think was the one that it had Luke Goss and Michael Jai White. That was one that Keone Waxman directed as well. That wasn't a Seagal film. So we've done a few of his that aren't Seagal's, but he's up there as well. Isaac Florentine would be up there. Sam Furstenberg. They're all in that sort of that 12 to 15 range, and I think that's where Jesse V. Johnson's going when we do One Ranger. So that'll be coming up in a couple weeks. VFW. I finally watched VFW. Got it on AMC Plus. So I got a couple more to watch on AMC Plus before I can probably close out my my subscription to them. But yeah, that'll be coming in a couple weeks. So this week Paradise City, next week One Ranger, and then 2 weeks VFW. And again, you can go to the upcoming reviews watch section to see what I've got on tap for upcoming reviews. Keep in mind that usually once we get past like the second layer, sometimes there are films that I haven't watched yet that aren't on that list yet as an upcoming review. So my plan usually is to, maybe I should merge the two, the watch list and the upcoming reviews list, so you can see both together. But I don't know. We'll see what happens there. And then before we get into the episode here, again, reminder that it is Indie April. So if you know an indie creative in your life, whether they're making music that's on Bandcamp or on Spotify, an indie author like myself, right, who's got books on Amazon, on KDP, if you're whether it's Kindle or in paperback. Somebody who makes movies, right? If you have a friend who makes movies, if they've got an Indiegogo out there, that maybe a filmmaker that you're a fan of has an Indiegogo out there. Whoever it is, this is the month to support indie creatives. And so, of course, with me, you've got my novels. The links are in the podcast description. We've got Don's House in the Mountains, my newest novel, which is available in paperback and in Kindle. Same with Bainbridge. Bainbridge is cheaper, so you can support the site for a lot cheaper if you want to do Bainbridge. I think it's $2.99 on Kindle, something like that. It's a relatively cheap price. And, of course, Threadless, which... probably by the time you hear this episode, the promotion that Threadless is doing will be done, but there's a 15% off promotion on Threadless. If you follow the link in the podcast description to my Threadless page, there'll be a banner to the Threadless page. There'll be a banner that will tell you how much, about the discount, if it's still available or not. But you could always go there to get your DTVC merch. I know here in Philly, it's close to 80 degrees today, which in Celsius, I'm not sure what that is in Celsius. I usually do, to convert the two, it's like, I think it's subtract 32 and then cut it in half, I think is how you go from Fahrenheit to Celsius. So what would that be? That would, doing math in real time, it's always good. But I think that would be like 22 degrees, 23 degrees in Celsius. That's about what it is here in April, which we're not used to it being that warm. But hey, suddenly it's that warm. You got to get some T-shirts, and we've got tons of great T-shirts over at the DTVC Threadless. So definitely check us out there as well. Another great way to support indie is to buy their merch. So whether it's our merch or and again another indie creative out there that you're a fan of, buying their merch. This is, if you were always thinking about buying a t-shirt for them, this is the time to buy the t-shirt. Again, Indie April, time to support indie creatives. All right, so with that, why don't we have our theme song here with John Cross from After Movie Diner and Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures. So another great indie creative you could support. Go to Bandcamp, Miscellaneous Plumbing Fixtures. He has a whole collection of great albums out there that you can purchase there and download to your phone and listen to, which is I always enjoy doing. But yeah, we'll be listening to, he'll be doing our theme song here, and then when we come back, Mitch from the Video Vacuum will be on, and we will be looking at Dragon Lives Again. All right, we are back, and we are joined once again by Mitch Lovell from Video Vacuum. Welcome back, Mitch.
Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm good. So now, the last time we were on, we were talking about the fact that between when we were recording and when we were posting, that you were probably going to have a new book out, which you do have a new book out. So congratulations on the new book.
Well, thank you. Yes, it's called The Kung Fu Companion, the Chopsaki Movie Guide. And it's just an exploration of 60 plus years of martial arts movies, and just there's like horror, like kung fu movies have like a lot of subgenres that are really kind of fun to kind of peel the onion back and see how it's all kind of connected, and what kind of wacky paths the trends and so forth the genre takes. And also I wanted to highlight some of the stars of the genre, like Jimmy Wang Yu, Steven Seagal, Jean-Claude Van Damme, just kind of give you not only like a taste of just the kind of like what was on the video store shelves in the 90s, but also kind of what kind of came before that and kind of was able to usher that genre in.
Yeah, I think I've kind of, so I just full disclosure, I've got my copy on Kindle, and because I was reading it while I was riding the subway and stuff like that, and kind of going through the different reviews, and I really like that you have that sort of that perspective of time, because one of the things I was realizing with watching Captain America: Winter Soldier is that it's just sort of taken for granted that Captain America as a hero would know martial arts, right? And he would be using martial arts in his fights, and that he and the Winter Soldier would be using martial arts. But watching something like The Predator recently, that was in '87, and nobody was doing martial arts really in that movie, beyond like a few moves. But it's interesting how much we take for granted that martial arts are in action movies almost every time, when that wasn't always the case.
Yeah, it's neat to see how over time it's been kind of ingrained in culture, and especially like I think the direct-to-video market really helped to usher that in, because you had guys like Gary Daniels, Jeff Speakman, who weren't necessarily like household names, but almost by osmosis, and then Jackie Chan kind of finally hits big in America, like, early 90s, mid 90s. So it's one of those things that, and the Wachowskis using Yuen Wu Ping for the martial arts choreography of The Matrix. So little by little, what was basically, relegated to like the triple features of the grindhouses and, early morning kung fu theater TV watching is kind of become accepted by the mainstream.
Yeah, and you make a really great point about the DTV market, because you think late '80s, early '90s, when it was really mostly Seagal and Van Damme who were doing this, and then everybody was trying to get their own version of I guess their own version of Van Damme as well, but definitely their own version of Seagal, right? Because I think that's what Speakman was supposed to be. That's what Thomas Ian Griffith was supposed to be, and or Thomas Ian Griffin, right? Not Griffith. Yeah, I'm confusing with Melanie Griffith, but anyway. But that's what they were supposed to be. But what's interesting is in the DTV world, right? It was like, okay, Dom the Dragon Wilson or Cynthia Rothrock or, like you said, Gary Daniels. They were kind of the DTV answer to Seagal and Van Damme. And in a way, right, it was like for us as fans going to the video store, we wanted that kind of stuff. We wanted more of that. I guess Chuck Norris is another name. I probably kind of forgetting to mention Chuck Norris there. He kind of was even bigger in the 80s.
Well, it's and then when you go back earlier, like with Bruce Lee hitting, he was like the first household martial artist, uh, that everybody knew, and then when he's taken away at a really early age, it leaves this void, and I think that happened before video, but a lot of those movies that were kind of like a lot of people that didn't have access to those downtown Hong Kong theaters where they would just grind out like triple features, quadruple features of kung fu movies. The video store is really where kind of that kind of watershed moment takes place. So you had, and then of course you have all the movies in the '80s that had ninja in the title.
Right.
So that also kind of if like your family like watched all the ninja movies in the store, then you would start going kind of exploring more into like, okay, well, what's newer that's kind of gives me that same kind of ninja vibe.
Yeah, that's a great point too, because like it's funny. I remember Cynthia Rothrock on the Millionaires Express Blu-ray. She was talking about when she was learning martial arts. I'm assuming it was in Philadelphia because she's from Wilmington, Delaware. That her sensei, they would take her to Chinatown and they would watch Hong Kong movies. And I mean, there's no place in, at least not that I know of in Chinatown here in Philadelphia, that shows old Hong Kong movies like that. But like for her, that would have been her opportunity. But again, her being in the Philadelphia metro area, she's got that advantage to being, a city nearby that had a Chinatown. But like you said, not many people did. And of course, me growing up in Maine, that was the case. But I remember like somebody up the street renting Chinese Connection or something like that. And, everybody would get together and watch Chinese Connection. And yeah, so it was like kind of this discovery where everybody was watching those, with the advent of video, they were all at the video store.
Yeah, and it's for, people that are just mainly accustomed to just the American way of doing things. When you go to the video store and you're like 12 or 13 and you see, like, I'm speaking from personal experience, like New Fist of Fury with Jackie Chan, and it's in the, all these videos are in these, very like uh small like home video boxes that were the mass produced ones. Then you get to like the big clamshell ones of like the Jackie Chan ones and the the Godfrey Ho ninja movies. You're like, well, what is this? And you discover that it's a genre totally unto itself, a totally different way of filmmaking, and you're either hooked or you're not. And it's one of those things where like I watch everything. I don't really discriminate, and like when once you get a taste of like the Hong Kong style of action, it's hard to go back.
Yeah, that's for sure. Because I think when you watch, just thinking as a kid growing up, where you would see, obviously, like, yeah, with a Schwarzenegger or even a Stallone, those characters kind of brute force their way through situations. So like, Schwarzenegger was an exceptional athlete, and you watch him in those movies where he can like dodge things and he can kind of roll and tumble and do all of that kind of stuff. But for the most part, he's not like doing a lot of martial arts. He's kind of just picking people up by the throat and giving great lines, decking people and stuff like that. What the martial, but I think for fans of the genre, of action, when you're seeing someone who's smaller, who's like taking out people with more with moves and things like that, it's so much more exciting, or not more exciting, but exciting in a different way that kind of added a different level to it. And I think for fans, we were like, we wanted to consume as much action as possible. I mean, it's even hard for me to remember the genesis of it. Like, was it Seagal first and then Shaw Brothers and that kind of thing, or was it the other way around? But yeah, it was always that kind of that thing where you were getting a different kind of action. But like, as a consumer, like as kids, we just wanted all of it, it seems like.
And then it's kind of cool too, like when you're kind of like branching out from just the mainstream Hollywood stuff, and then you see, you stumble onto something like Police Story, and you're like, well, wait a minute, Hollywood's been ripping off Police Story for the past decade, so it's funny how that they kind of cherry pick the best stuff and kind of dress it up as their own.
Well, because that's another piece of it too, right? Because especially for us, if we didn't grow up near grindhouse theaters or we didn't, have access to that, a lot of the people who were, filmmakers in the 80s did have that access. I mean, obviously, Tarantino's like the most obvious example, but I think a lot of the people that were making action films in the 80s, they grew up watching that grindhouse stuff, and they would take a lot of those story ideas. And as for us, watching them as kids, they were, we thought they were completely original ideas. And then you watch one of these Hong Kong films, you're like, oh, that just seems really familiar. Okay, I get this now.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting too to see like the, those kind of like the historical when we think of like the traditional kung fu movies, like that's their version of our westerns. It's a very like the stranger kind of comes into the town and it's ruled by a warlord, which would be like just like a cattle baron in a traditional western. And there's always the scene where they go into a like a noodle house and like they're harassed and they get into a big fight, which is like our version of the barroom brawls. So it's very it's just like a different take on just like a very standard action trope.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. Because I remember, Scott Murphy from All 90s Action All the Time, and New Horror Express, who was on when we were talking about Seagal films. He was asking me about, those Seagal Eastern European ones. Like, why is it they always have this like Romanian, Eastern European nightclub or strip club where, where things happen? And I was saying how there's always that sense of danger in there. There's kind of like the Tatooine cantina element to them. But really, right, what it is that they're also kind of playing on those same standards, where it's like that idea of the saloon in the Western. It's Romania, the strip club in Romania, with the hard driving techno music. But like you said, in the Hong Kong films, it was the noodle house, but it had the same vibe where it's like you knew when they went into that place that trouble was going to happen, just like you knew in a Western when the main character walked into that bar, and then the kind of the greasy faced guy with the black teeth who walks over and starts giving him a hard time, that trouble's going to start, and unfortunately that bar owner is going to be dealing with a lot of damages after the fact.
And in as an extension to that, when you think just kind of like basic 80s 70s pop culture, when you think of like Star Wars, I mean Star Wars took just about everything from martial arts. And even like the idea of Yoda, just like small unassuming old guy, being very powerful and very knowledgeable in self-defense. And that's just like kind of a trope through kung fu movies too, with like drunken master, like the old drunk guy is actually the great kung fu mastermind of all time. So it's just very kind of interesting to see what gets kind of cherry picked and dressed up as as time goes on.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because the kind of creativity that would come out of those movies, and of course this movie we're going to be talking about in a little bit really underscores that creativity. But yeah, yes, a lot of times they're playing on these basic premises that we are familiar with in westerns. Because I think that was part of it too. Is I think for them, right, the movies, their version of the grindhouse were our westerns. They were getting those movies, and I know even like Kurosawa was a huge John Ford fan. So even he, thought of Western. So that's like, Jimbo, Sanjuro, they kind of come on, or, even Hidden Fortress. And then, of course, Lucas is then influenced by Kurosawa, who was previously influenced by Ford. So it's always interesting how you kind of have that feedback loop there. But you think of like a Godfrey Ho, who you have a chapter on in here, and he is just such a fascinating I don't say specimen. That's the right term. He's such a fascinating. Talent is probably the best way to describe it. But it's like the and you've been on the pod before. We've talked about some Godfrey Ho movies, but they're just such fascinating ideas where it's just like I'm going to buy up a whole bunch of Hong Kong and Thailand movies, and I'm going to splice them in with footage of actual martial arts and put the whole thing together.
Yeah, well, it's really fascinating because like when you're talking about all these genres and stuff, there's always the top tier guys, and then there's the guys on the bottom, and I not that when I say bottom, I mean it's just like almost from a distribution standpoint, like why release one movie when we can release two and edit them together, and it's happening at a time when the marketplace is so hungry for product, kind of like right around when the content wars of streaming, like we're so hungry for martial arts, and anything with the word ninja in the title, we'll accept it even if it doesn't even make sense.
Right. It's funny because it's like there's a indie filmmaker Matt Farley who he makes music as well under the banner Motorn Media, and one of the things he did was he just put out a whole bunch of songs on Spotify that were like about poop. That was like songs about poop. I think is the album, with the idea being that like what would kids search for if they were using their parents' Spotify, right? And he has like so many songs on there, not just about that, but all kinds of different topics that each song itself maybe makes $1 to $2 a year, but because he's got like I think like 20,000 songs, he's making like close to like 60 or 70,000 a year off all those songs. And I think Godfrey Ho's kind of was the originator of that, of like, okay, a video store owner in Poughkeepsie might buy one ninja movie, and one in wherever Barstow or wherever in the country in the United States, they're going to buy another ninja movie. But if I make 10 ninja movies for the cost of making one, right? Because he's just using the same pieces and just cutting them together. He's got 10 chances of getting a sale. And so it's like one movie may only sell three, but if he's got 10 and they each sell three, or if he has 10 and they each sell one, that's still 10 sales versus, three for the one. And that volume that he did, at that time when you had so many video store owners that were looking for content and looking for what sold, and they knew, okay, ninjas are selling, so I need ninja movies. It was almost like this, it worked out perfect. But a lot of those purchasers, they didn't even know what they were buying, right? They were just going through the catalog and being like, maybe their kids were even telling them, this is what you should pick out, Dad, and they were like, okay, yeah, we'll mark that one off the list. So Godfrey Ho filled this perfect niche, but at the same time, it's like some of them, the martial arts quality, think of like Undefeatable or Honor and Glory, which weren't the kind of cobbled together movies like this, but also like some of his 70s martial arts stuff. It's really good stuff, and it's very fascinating the way he puts it all together.
Yeah, I mean, speaking as a director, as an action director, he really does have his moments where he really shines. And uh, I think Incredible Shaolin, uh, Thunder Kick, that was a really good one. But like, as speaking from a distributor point, it's just yeah, like it's almost like a shell game, and it's like you said, it's fascinating is like the best word to describe it, because it's just like how how many moves ahead are you in 3D chess when you come up to that with that idea?
Right, exactly. And it's funny because I think it was John Cross who found an article somebody had written about Godfrey Ho films, and he said the quote, and I think it was like Den of Geek that wrote the article, and the quote was something along the lines of like the these movies are so beyond the value judgments of good or bad. Like it's impossible to really judge them along these kind of lines that we currently judge movies by, with our, two thumbs up or different stars, or even like, rent or buy, those kinds of things. Like it, to even find a way to look at them within a proper context is sometimes difficult because of what he was doing.
Right. Well, that's a good point too, because you can only, you know, apples and oranges, and you can only compare a Godfrey Ho movie to another Godfrey Ho movie,
Right.
or
Yeah.
two halves of a Godfrey Ho movie.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and it is. I mean, the other thing, of course, with this is we look at like the Marvel movies now where it's like, you know, guys like Samuel L. Jackson and Robert Downey Jr. have like records for like the most times they've been in movies. They've appeared in movies as their character. And of course, each time they make those appearances, right, it costs a certain amount of money. It's a whole, it's a SAG, piece, all of that kind of stuff. And you wonder, like, if, like, the producers at Disney, like, look at the Godfrey Ho stuff and just be like, oh, God, we've got all this footage of Robert Downey Jr. We've got all this footage of Samuel L. Jackson. I wish we could just, why do we need to just why do we have to have him come in here and shoot when we can just use this footage and put that in at the end of the movie, And I guess maybe they could do it as long as they paid him, right? As long as they paid them for it, they could get away with doing it. But yeah, it's funny with the way, we kind of get used to seeing all these actors in making all these small appearances in these movies now with the connected universes. But Godfrey Ho kind of created the template for how to do it maybe more on the cheap.
Yeah, with Richard Harrison, like I don't know if he played the same ninja in all those movies, but there was definitely a few that kind of fed into it, and I don't know how aware he was of what was going on, or like, because there's very, of course, the Garfield phone makes from Ninja Terminator makes multiple appearances, so I don't know if he knew that he was getting paid for one and appearing in 10, or if he was his agent had any idea of what was kind of going on, or if it was just a quick paycheck for him.
He says he didn't. So he said he was only signed on to do two ninja movies and it ended up being 20. And he said it ruined his career because it just like he couldn't get work, which, you know, yes, it's probably true that it didn't help. Maybe if they were like, you've got three ninja movies out this year. Why what are you doing this? Like kind of like how like Fred Olen Ray or Jim Wynorski, how they pump out so many movies that they had to use aliases because they didn't want to be like oh, it's another Fred Olen Ray movie or something like that. That's kind of what he said what happened to him. But it's also that cautionary tale of like what it means to not do a SAG movie. Unfortunately, in his case, like I know John Saxon talked about almost dying on Hands of Steel because he was supposed to ride in a helicopter for a scene and the helicopter crashed and the people on board died. But he ended up just not riding that time, but he said he would never do a non-SAG movie again. But it's one of those things, right? If you agree to do a non-SAG role for Godfrey Ho, just check yourself out on IMDb and tell me how many roles he puts you in.
Well, fortunately for Richard Harrison, I don't think the budget on those allowed for helicopters. So
Right, exactly.
most of the budget went to ninja outfits and headbands that had the word ninja embroidered on them.
Right. What I loved about those ninja bands, especially some of them, they had that like kind of cursive script that looked like an 80s ski resort kind of script, where you just kind of see like the image below of somebody like downhill alpine skiing or something like that.
Yeah, and it was just one of those, again, one of those nutty touches that just kind of you endear you to that subgenre or just turn you off completely and you're like, never again.
Right, exactly. Well, because that's it, right? Is it like you just, the fact that the ninjas have, because it's like this whole thing. I kind of also think the same thing with Amir Shervan, but also I think you could say it with a lot of these Hong Kong films, just in the way that they were edited or dubbed by actors with American accents. Is that you kind of see American culture reflected back at you through like this prism of another culture that's really fascinating, right? That like Godfrey Ho must have looked at the United States and thought, oh, Garfield, right? Americans think Garfield's really great, so make sure we have Richard Harrison talking on a Garfield phone. But also like the ninja thing, like it's just like he thought, yeah, Americans like ninjas so much that yeah, we'll just write it on on their headbands when they're fighting. It's a fascinating thing to kind of think about like what our culture was at these certain times and how these other cultures like try to give us what they think we want from a movie.
And you've got to love it because ninjas are trained to be stealthy, hidden. unseen killing machines, and then you have the ones in the Godfrey Ho movie that are wearing kind of these fluorescent orange and pink outfits, and with the word ninja, so everybody can see that he is a ninja when you actually want to be hidden. And it's again, it's just one of those kind of chef kiss, like when you're a fan of WTF cinema, you're just like, okay, yeah, this is definitely my jam right here.
Yeah, and I read it on Wikipedia. So the origin of ninjas, in terms of where they came from in Japanese, history, they were kind of like the spies and like the sappers, the ones who did the work that the samurais wouldn't do. But the reason why they wear black garbs is that I think it was, I don't know what style of theater it was, but with Japanese theater, when they would depict historical scenes with ninjas, they would have them wear black to show that they were invisible. Because really, what ninjas did a lot of times is that they would disguise themselves as whoever they were invading. So, like if like there might be another feudal lord that would have like their guards, they would dress up like those guards to infiltrate that community and be able to take over the castle and set things on fire and do all kinds of stuff like that. So that's where the black garb came from. So it was to make, to pretend that they were visible. And then Godfrey Ho takes it to this other level where he's like, let's do all these colors because, America in the 80s was just all, well, actually, I shouldn't say that. Like later 80s, we were more colorful. But I guess, yeah, if you were watching like popular TV at that time, right? We were colorful. And then, of course, like Mortal Kombat, I'm pretty sure that Boone and Tobias, when they started doing their ninjas for Mortal Kombat, that they were influenced by that as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point too, because I think 93 is about when Mortal Kombat hit, and then also kind of is like that perfect wave where a lot more Jackie Chan is getting into the video stores. A lot of DTV action movies happen, so it's like that those waves of ninja movies kind of was like setting up what was kind of like I guess the first, maybe not the first, but some important seeds are being planted for the future of martial arts.
Yeah, one thing that I was very surprised about in reading your book is that in terms of ninja movies, you mentioned at the top of the show that this book covers 60 years of kung fu movies, and I didn't realize that there was one of the earlier ninja movies was from 1963, was it Shinobi no Mono Vengeance, aka Ninja 2.
Yeah, and that was one that I just caught on a fluke. I think it was on Tubi or something, and I think it was the second of four movies, and I never did get to see the other one, so I was kind of lost trying to watch it. But I wanted to include it, even though I didn't have much frame of reference for it. Was just to show you that, yeah, like these films go back kind of, further than you may think.
Yeah, and then kind of looking at the modern, I mean, what's interesting, right, is that a lot of the earlier stuff, especially in your book, it's almost all actors from Hong Kong or from other parts of China that are from that area, and in some cases maybe you have like a Japanese actor here or there in the films. But as we go on, we don't just move to like other parts of the Western world, like with Jean-Claude Van Damme in Brussels or Seagal here in the U.S., but even like Tony Jaa in Thailand. That it's sort of like martial arts films, and of course Iko Uwais, he's not in here, but he's from Indonesia. That it's sort of becoming this worldwide phenomenon where anybody can really be a kung fu star.
Right, and I think the guys you mentioned, Ja and Iko Uwais, they bring in these their own flavor, their own vibe, whether it's cultural or just their own charisma. Like Tony Jaa uses his knees extensively, uses Muay Thai fighting, and that's something that we've seen bits and pieces of, but never like an established star using that specific technique. So, and then you're able to build an entire vehicle or multiple vehicles on that foundation of that discipline of martial arts. So and then that way you have somebody that's just not like a brawler or like like Aikido, like Seagal, or doing the splits like John Claude. So he's able to bring like another flavor with him.
Yeah, and I think that's one reason too why Scott Adkins has done really well in sort of in this ecosystem where it's really difficult. I mean, obviously Tony Jaa, Iko Uwais, they've come from outside the U.S. and have kind of been able to make something of a name for themselves. But a lot of names like Gary Daniels, Don the Dragon Wilson. I think it talked about like the movie La Linnea, I think, or The Line, that he was it was a R.L.'s Fraser film that he was supposed to be in. And then they ended up getting Ray Liotta instead, and they wrote him out of it. And he kind of took a hiatus from acting for a while. But it was like once those big names started moving into DTV, some of the other names, kind of struggled to kind of move through. And one of the things I think with Scott Adkins, one reason why I think he's done well is that he doesn't really have a specific style either. He kind of can just do kind of anything. And it's, it's almost like a jack of all trades kind of thing where he's not going to be as exceptional at like kickboxing as say Van Damme or as exceptional at Aikido as Seagal, but he can still kind of do enough to make it look really good.
It also, I mean, he like as time's gone on, he's kind of proven himself to be kind of like something of a character actor too.
Yeah.
Especially with like John Wick Chapter 4 when he's like kind of encased in like like a fat suit and
Right.
having like a really outrageous accent. And we've seen bits and pieces of that, with him using various accents or just kind of and even like showing like in the Accident Man movies like little bits of humor here and there that shows he's more than just kind of like a flavor of the month. And of course his physicality is just he's one of the most impressive guys that we've got working today. So I think like guys like Van Damme too have like kind of shown like either from their acting like in Enemies Closer or the later Universal Soldier sequels, like that they're more than just you know kicks and punches. Like if they want to really last in the business, they've got to kind of either tweak their image or kind of add something more to their bag of tricks.
Yeah, that's a great point too, because I know Michael Jai White, one of his quotes that I remember from an interview was, "Once you kick someone in the face, you get known for kicking people in the face," and that was his way of saying like you don't want to get typecast like that. You want to be able to show that you could act and do all kinds of different things because the roles aren't always going to be there. And I mean, his case, he talked about, he thought he was going to be taking over the Undisputed franchise. It's like, okay, I'm doing the sequel to Undisputed. This is great. I'm going to take over this franchise here. Have my own DTV franchise. Next thing you know, right, he does that with Scott Adkins, and suddenly now it's Boyka. It's he got one run of it, and so that was kind of the thing that he was saying. And I think it's kind of the same thing for it, like you said with Adkins. A lot of them realize that, and I think that's one of the unfortunate things for Don the Dragon Wilson is, I mean, he's a better actor now than he was when he first started, but you look at his real peak for a career, it was kind of right in the 90s. It was almost like a 10-year window where he was banging out a bunch of movies. But I don't, he didn't get enough time, I think, to really get his feet under him before suddenly, he's getting replaced by Ray Liotta in movies and he's taking a hiatus. So that's the other piece of it too, right? Is that, I think Scott Adkins realized I don't have a lot of time to figure this out. Like I've got to, if I'm going to keep getting parts and they don't want to give them to Van Damme or Seagal or whoever else, I've really got to keep showing myself to do, to be versatile.
Well, it's kind of interesting with Don the Dragon Wilson because the majority of his movies, he's basically playing what we would assume would be Don the Dragon Wilson himself. He just this kind of like nice guy at the wrong place at the wrong time, just happens to know kung fu, and that's part of the charm of a Don the Dragon Wilson movie. He's just kind of like an all shucks kind of soft spoken guy, but when the chips are down, like he can really kung fu the crap out of somebody. And I think like if you're watching a Don the Dragon Wilson movie and you see him as a villain, it would like I don't think it would hit the same way. And so like he's like one of those interesting ones where you're hoping that you're just getting the solid run of the mill blood fist type of movie. You don't really want him trying anything out of his wheelhouse. I mean, for me personally at least.
No, I totally agree with you on that, except one interesting note about his career. His very first film, New York Chinatown, which I believe is still on YouTube, he plays a villain in that. And he's actually really good as the baddie in that. And it's funny because seeing him in that, knowing that that was his very first role, it's almost hard to reconcile that part with, those kind of wooden performances he turns in those early Blood Fist movies. But I think it was because it's a small part, and he plays kind of almost more of a heel than he plays a villain. I mean, he does villainous things, and I almost kind of feel like he could probably, draw on being an athlete. Like, it's like, how many people do you compete against who are jerks? You just be one of those jerks. But it's a very fascinating piece of his career. That movie, New York Chinatown, which, yeah, anybody who's listening, it's on YouTube, so it's an interesting watch.
Well, definitely have to check that one out then.
Now, one of the things I also, maybe kind of transitioning as we go into talking about the movie we're going to talk about today, which is The Dragon Lives Again. I think that's it. We can do that title or Deadly Hands of Kung Fu. We've got two distinct titles, but one of your chapters covers the Brucesploitation phenomenon. So for people who aren't familiar with that, what is Brucesploitation?
Well, you know, in the 70s, Bruce Lee was the end all be all of kung fu cinema. He, American audiences got a taste of him when he was Kato in the Green Hornet, but he was kind of pigeonholed by the American way of doing things, so he couldn't really break out. So he goes back to Hong Kong and he makes the Big Boss, Chinese Connection, Way of the Dragon, Return of the Dragon, and he is poised for superstardom. And he makes Enter the Dragon, and he which is like the crown jewel of all martial arts cinema, I'd say. But before it's released, he passes away and he dies, and it's just a blow to the whole genre, the film community, to his fans. And what this does is leaves a void, and we as fans will never get another Bruce Lee movie again. What do we do? Well, producers know what they're going to do. They're going to take guys that sort of, kind of, but not really look like Bruce Lee, and they're going to give them similar sounding names like Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee, Bruce Lee, Bruce Liu, Bruce Lowe, and they just slap the word Bruce in a kung fu movie title, and by God, we'll go see it. It's just it became a genre unto itself in the 70s and the early 80s. And I mean, even Bruce himself starred in some of these movies. I mean, Game of Death, when he died, he had film scenes with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and a couple other scenes here and there. And after he died, Robert Klaus, who directed Enter the Dragon, he pasted everything together and made an actual movie out of it. But since Bruce died, there was no way to kind of make the scenes work, so they had to use a double. And sometimes he's got a motorcycle helmet on his head, and sometimes he has a beard or dark sunglasses to disguise the fact that it's not Bruce Lee. So when that is kind of the mainstream Hollywood way of doing a Brucesploitation movie, everything else from the make a quick buck school of filmmaking is going to be that much worse.
Well, right, because it's I was trying to think of similar situations to this, right? To because like you talked about, like Bruce Lee was he was like that I say, yeah, it's saying the term cash cow, but right, he was, like you said, he was the pinnacle, and he was the one that was really going to maybe push Hong Kong cinema. You almost wonder, right, like if he had survived, if he hadn't died, if names like Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, even more so, like, if names like that would have been bigger in America sooner, because, he might have, with his presence, brought all of that with him, and who knows, even if we get names like Seagal or Van Damme, right? Or even too, like, how, like, I mean, Schwarzenegger, I mean, watching Predator recently, it's like, he's so larger than life. I can't imagine that, like, audiences craving Kung Fu would have been like, no, we don't want to see Arnold Schwarzenegger, because he's just such a big deal. But, it would have really, really altered the landscape for action movies. I mean, the closest comp that I could think of was hip hop, when, when Biggie and Tupac die. And I think Biggie and Tupac together probably were like they were like kind of this next wave of hip hop in terms of their influence. And I think you probably put Jay-Z maybe with them. But when they died, it left this huge void, and it was like, you remember hip hop in the early 2000s was all pretty much just like, how big the rims are in your car, how much money you have, how many women you get, all that kind of thing, and how much everybody hates you because you have all that stuff. And one of the things was that, with Kanye West, when he came along, everybody was looking for something just different, anything that could be possibly different. And he wasn't even really that different or even that like spectacular or anything, but people just were so craving something that wasn't, rims and dubs and all that kind of stuff, that suddenly he kind of blew up in a way that he never, would have necessarily done. And I it's hard to think about because I mean, I don't, like for example, like a Jackie Chan, if he kind of came into that vacuum there, but he's such a great talent that I don't think you can put him in the same category as Kanye West. But I think that's, he's maybe one of those ones that kind of grew up in that vacuum.
Well, I think there was a precedent set, and I don't know if anybody's really kind of put this together, and this is just something that I kind of stumbled on as a happy accident not too long ago. But Dick Randall, who is the producer of like Pieces, the slasher movie Pieces, he also produced uh, Challenge of the Dragon, which was one of the Brucesploitation movies. But going back, he also produced The Wild World of Jane Mansfield. And that was originally filmed as kind of like a Mondo movie, but with Jane Mansfield. And before that movie was finished, she tragically died. They had all this footage and they had nowhere to kind of go with it. So they hired a look-alike, they hired a sound-alike, they cobbled everything together, did as best of a job as they could. And then at the end, they kind of bring in the historical element of, oh, and then Jane Mansfield died. They showed the death car. They kind of exploit the death of Jane Mansfield at the end. So what you have is, actual scenes of Jane Mansfield, Jane Mansfield doubles, Jane Mansfield being dubbed, and parts of her life being exploited. And Dick Randall was the producer of that film. I think that is the kernel that kind of starts the whole Brucesploitation movie there. If we can do that with Jane Mansfield, we can do that with Bruce Lee.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point because because again, right, like I think we sometimes forget because we always think about how much Hong Kong cinema has influenced the American cinema landscape, that we sometimes forget like how much Hong Kong also is influenced by what's happening over here, and that a movie like that may have even played in Hong Kong and they would have seen it and been like, oh, this is interesting. And yeah, it may have influenced somebody like a Godfrey Ho. I have to think Godfrey Ho was probably very influenced by what he was seeing in the 70s by people cobbling together this Bruce Lee footage and thinking like, oh, we could do, I could, when he comes across a cache of films that he buys it as a lot. I wonder, he's just thinking like, oh, okay, well, I've already got the precedent for this. I've seen what we did with Bruce Lee in the 70s here in Hong Kong. I can do this with anybody. It doesn't have to be somebody who's dead. It can be Richard Harrison who's alive.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that same kind of, you know, why make 100% of a movie when you only have to make 40%? So it's very and actually Dick Randall, he when he made Pieces, he produced Pieces. That's why there's that random Bruce Lee cameo where Linda Day George is just walking, and then uh, he jumps out of the shadows and kung fu's her, and then he goes, "Oh, I'm the karate instructor. Hi!" And it's like it's just so random, but it's like one of those kind of touches where you're just like, okay, yeah, like now we have a Bruce Lee imitator in a what's an American slasher takeoff. So it's kind of funny to see where like even. I mean, I would even consider something like No Retreat, No Surrender a Brucesploitation movie, since Kurt McKinney's getting tutelage from Bruce Lee beyond the grave. It's kind of like almost like the American Karate Kid version of a Brucesploitation movie.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point because it's the kind of thing that you would see in one of these Bruceploitations if it's not, again, an actor with a name that's very similar to or it's really not even their name, right? Like they had their own name, what was the one Chinatown Connection that has one of Bruce Lee's clones in it. And Bruce, I think it's a Bruce Lie, I think, right? I think
Yeah.
China. And so I think and he was like in the States trying to be a he wanted to be his own kind of actor. He didn't want to be known as a Bruce Lee clone. He was trying to kind of make it here in the States. Though I do think he was kind of trying to make it. He was still listed as Bruce Lie on on the cover of Chinatown Connection. So I was like maybe he was testing the lengths to which being a Bruce Lee clone could get you roles. If you could get roles in America based off of that. He did like 2 movies here, then went back to Hong Kong, and he still had a career there. But yeah, thinking about no retreat, no surrender, it feels exactly like you would. It feels like the kind of thing that would have happened in Hong Kong, and the filmmakers. I think being from Hong Kong themselves, they probably were drawing on that tradition.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because like I think Bruce Lie, pound for pound, made the better movies. I think he was. Yeah, I think when you saw his name, you knew you were getting a little bit more quality, whether it was either from the story or the action. Bruce Lee, L.E. or I. He's probably my favorite because he just starred in some of the nuttiest movies, and I think he had the more extensive filmography. Uh, but yeah, uh, like Challenge of the Dragon, where he fights like a bull. There's it's funny too. I guess we should make this distinction. There's two different kinds of Bruceploitation. There's the Bruceploitation that kind of will show maybe public domain clips of Bruce, sometimes at his funeral, which is in really poor taste, but that's what they do. Or like file footage of him and try to make it this kind of historic account, like the real Bruce Lee. They'll show like his early days, and then it becomes like a traditional martial arts film, but with like Bruce Lee as the main character. Or it's just some crazy ass movie and they just slap the word Bruce in the title. Like I can think of like Bruce Lee fights back from the grave, where you have this really amazing scene where it's Bruce Lee's grave, and then all of a sudden lightning strikes and the guy jumps out of the grave, and Bruce Lee's alive, and then it just cuts to, and then it's just a random kung fu movie.
Yeah.
But that you've got that scene where he fights back from the grave, so you don't, nobody feels ripped off.
Well, yeah, and it's a good point too, because like there's part like you said, like nobody feeling ripped off or that kind of piece of it, and then there's also I think like you talked about this element where it was like everybody loved Bruce Lee so much that he was sort of a hero to so many people that watched his movies that in a way it's almost like the filmmakers loved him that much too, and I don't want to say like it's almost like they're making the movies as a way to say like yeah we all love him and wish he was here again, this is like our dream too, like you can like kind of dream for an hour and a half that Bruce Lee actually didn't die, that he's still with us here. It's an interesting idea with movies, and we don't really see it here in America when it comes to, I mean you think of like Scott Walker dying in Fast and Furious. You don't see Vin Diesel like bringing using Scott Walker in footage of him, or having one of his brothers play him in future Fast and Furious films. It'd be kind of funny if he did, but we don't really see that same kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's almost like Bruce Lee, Bruce Lowe. They're like the Mr. Pibb, Dr. Perky, version of, if Bruce Lee's the Dr. Pepper,
Right.
like any port in a storm kind of thing.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And it is, you think about like, yeah, you go to, like you go to like those, I don't know, like some kind of church bazaar or something like that, where it's like they have all the store-bought brands of all the sodas. And it would be like, yeah, if it's like, instead of having Bruce Lee make an appearance at the event, it's Bruce Lee or Bruce Lay is showing up. I remember when I was a kid in school, we had a poor man's Harlem Globetrotters visit our school. I can't remember what they were called, but they were definitely a poor man's version. Our school was not going to be ponying up for the real Harlem Globetrotters to play at our high school gym.
Yeah, and it's funny where like I said, any port in a storm, like you're like, okay, like and I guess money, budget, all kind of plays into it, but somebody wanted to go see all these movies because they made so many of them, and like kind of going back to your point of that why Jackie Chan and Sammo Hung they didn't really kind of catch on till later. I think these movies, and some of them are very bad. Some of them are very enjoyable and fun, but I think the majority of these movies were so bad that it poisoned the well for a lot of people. And those Asian stars didn't really get a second chance until the 90s.
Yeah, and that's another thing too. When you think of like a Rumble in the Bronx, for example, that's a movie that had, I don't think it had any dubbing, right? Or did it have dubbing? I can't remember.
Yeah, it was dubbed.
It was dubbed. That's right. But yeah, it
Was
was like a kind of a
Siu-Lung.
better quality of it, and of course the production, and of course being filmed in the United States that helped as well. Even though there was a series of Hong Kong films that were filmed in the U.S., like for example that New York Chinatown one that I mentioned. So they did try to film them here, but yeah, it's interesting. Like where they kind of put that money and time into it. Though, I mean, again, you think, yeah, I guess, thinking about some of the ones that were higher quality too. I mean, yes, Police Story was a good one. That was one that, had somewhat of an audience here. But I think of like a movie like City Hunter, for example, which is a really fun movie to watch. And it has a lot of great stuff going on with it. But also, I mean, the humor was just, even for like early 90s America, the humor was at a level that like would have, turned off audiences, or people would be like, I don't care. I don't think you should be making jokes about people getting AIDS and things like that. Like those things aren't really funny. Like even in '93, it wasn't. We think of now being much more PC, but even back then, by '93's PC standards, City Hunter is a little bit much. So I think that was the other part of it too. Is that sometimes the humor didn't translate, or the themes or the ideas in those movies didn't always translate either.
And a lot of it, I think a lot of it too was the argument from the executives was always that Jackie Chan moves too fast. It won't like the American audiences won't register his moves because he moves at such speeds. And when he did like Cannonball Run and The Protector, like the choreographers are like, no, you have to slow down so we can see what you're doing. And he's like, no, that's like, that's my style. And, that's why he got very frustrated very fast and then went back to Hong Kong. But I think a lot of it too is, uh, you know, of all the martial arts people, Jackie Chan is his own brand. And I think he also resented them trying to make him into a Bruce clone. And I think he set out to just establish his own brand.
Yeah, that's a great point, because you're right about that. Yeah, that's a really good point there. That he wasn't interested in being a Bruce Lee clone, and he didn't want to have that sort of that tag associated with him. And he was kind of trying to like make his own way. And of course, being younger than Bruce Lee too, I think a part of it was he came up under Bruce Lee, and so he yeah, he wouldn't want to try to do that. And you the other point you make about the speed of his moves, it is fascinating, right? Because that was a criticism, right? That was an issue. And we watch martial arts stuff now from in America from those early periods, and it's like, oh, this is like really, I mean, I think of Undefeatable, for example, which is really well choreographed. That end fight scene with John Miller and Don Niem. It's a really well choreographed scene, but it's very deliberate. You can see kind of every punch, and Godfrey Ho has a very wide angle on it, so we kind of see everything. But it is kind of a difference between now, after the Jackie Chan influence, you think of like the Rush Hour films, and then of course Jet Li comes in and starts doing the same stuff. It's like now when you watch a Marvel movie, with Captain America fighting the Winter Soldier, it's all in that very fast style. And of course, not only is it fast because of the martial arts moves, but the way it's shot with the quick edits and things like that, which is something that wasn't done in those Hong Kong movies.
Yeah, and fortunately we're past the whole shaky cam of the mid 2000s there. So like, that the Marvel movies kind of started a little bit after that. The Bourne Identity influence shaking, and only being able to see somebody's knees and elbows like during the fight scene. That was definitely one of the low points for action fans, at least me this action fan. But like now it's nice to see that we're going back to actual choreography, showing actually being able to see bodies in motion, and you know in editing that doesn't just kind of eviscerate everything from the scene.
Right, because that was the thing, right? Is they were trying to hide Matt Damon as a martial, instead of getting somebody who knew how to do martial arts, they got Matt Damon and they cut the scene to make it look like he was doing everything when he wasn't. And that, of course, I think the sort of the high point or low point. It was a low point, I'm not sure, but Liam Neeson in his 60s in the Taken movies, right, where it's like, you know, we think of like an actor at that age being, Charles Bronson, right, as Kersey in the Death Wish films. He was not doing martial arts stuff. They weren't doing quick edits. He was, putting bombs in remote controlled soccer balls and killing people that way. Which, if Neeson was doing that kind of thing and Taken, it would have been really great. But you'd see sometimes even in the ads and stuff where they didn't edit well enough, where you'd see like he's kind of slowly putting his hand up to block somebody, and it doesn't look great. And but they kind of do those edits to kind of try to make it work. Yeah, it is nice that now it seems like there's a more of a push. I think some of the actors involved want to learn martial arts more, but I think there's also a better push of like, okay, we've got better doubles too that we can get in here and do these scenes, and kind of maybe that know the martial arts. You think of like actresses like Amy Johnson, who can I think she's been double on some of those superhero movies. So yeah, we get kind of better looking scenes.
Yeah, and I've not seen the new Roadhouse yet, but the fact that I've heard they use CGI for fight scenes, I'm like a little iffy on that, but I want to see it eventually to make my own judgment. But it's like gosh, like it's almost, no pun intended, a slap in the face to all the choreography and martial arts know-how that's come before, especially in the Hong Kong movies.
Yeah, and kind of thinking about like those Hong Kong movies, you're thinking about how like how many of those movies influenced choreographers here. So you think of like an Art Camacho doing PM Entertainment flicks. He was influenced by I mean he obviously he learned martial arts in California, but was influenced by a lot of that, and so he would want the scenes to look in that way. I think also PM was one of the early ones to do sort of action director, fight director. Whereas a lot of American films, they didn't know how to shoot martial arts. I think that was one of the things that Jackie Chan had to like kind of push on them, was like, no, you need someone who knows how to shoot this. You can't just have your auteur director like trying to shoot a fight scene.
Yeah, and also like on a low budget film like a PM Entertainment, it's almost like the second unit. So while they're filming fight scenes, somebody else is getting dialogue scenes of the captain yelling at the two, detectives or whatever. So it's almost like you need that just to kind of make your day.
Yeah, it's amazing when you think of the talents that were coming out of PM at that time, where you had, obviously Spiro Rosatos is doing, all of the kind of big budget stuff now, but again, Art Camacho, who kind of still works in the industry as a fight choreographer, who was doing his kind of thing, Chad Stelsky, who is I think am I saying it right, Stelsky or Stahelski,
I think
who does the John Wick?
Stavisky? I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
yeah, because he got his start, I think, with PM as well, who does the
Hmm.
John Wick films. And it's we look at those PM films as like this sort of this high watermark for 90s action, which is just so crazy when you think of like, I mean, there were some really great, big budget actioners that came out of the 90s too. I mean, it was like Terminator 2 and stuff like that. But it is amazing this small movie house out of LA in the 90s was putting out some of the best stuff of the decade. But they had these really great talents they just kind of said, okay, all right, Spirit Rosatos, what do you want to do? Here we've got these vehicles that we can blow up. Here, just how do you want to put this together? Or like Art Camacho's like, okay, you've got Cynthia Rothrock in this movie, and you've got or you've got Gary Daniels here. We've got all these stuntmen that know martial arts. You put the scene together and you do it how you want. And I think he would take input, I think, from the stars like Wilson, Daniels and Rothrock. And so that really kind of made those scenes really, really good.
And also, there's a little bit of the old Godfrey Ho influence too, where they use the same explosions and reuse car chases and exploding helicopters here and there. So it's kind of it all kind of comes together.
Yeah, it is amazing. It's kind of it's interesting, like you said. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing. Again, kind of going back to your book, and I think for people, you know. Who kind of are getting new into to kung fu movies and in some of the Hong Kong stuff, is that like sort of seeing some of those techniques that were used in those movies. We think of the technique strictly being like how you shoot a good fight scene, right? Because those, Hong Kong really set the standard for how you shoot a good fight scene. And, a lot of the really big names, they kind of showed American filmmakers how you shoot those scenes and how to do that right. But there's so many other techniques when it came to working on a budget that Hong Kong movies, I think, also were the innovators on.
Yeah, and usually the philosophy for most of the kung fu fight scenes in the Hong Kong movies would be they would do their setup and they would do the argument that starts everything, and then they would do like a punch kick whatever, and then the guy jumps out of frame, and then it's a brand new setup, and they say, okay, well, what are we going to do here? Okay, you're going to throw him through the wall or whatever. And it was always kind of done in pieces but almost in order, so like you could always kind of know where you were going. And also it helped when you're filming in like these noodle houses or the bordello or wherever. So when you're the continuity is there, so if somebody punches a hole through the wall or smashes a table, the table is still smashed. You don't have to, it's not like the American style where they do it in pieces and then have to all figure it all out in the editing. And that
Right, you've
was
got
one of the big kind of you know uh, you know kind of cornerstones of the Hong Kong era.
Yeah, and that's for us, as low budget movie fans, right? We love, when you catch those mistakes where they, unfortunately, the script supervisor who has so many things to keep track of misses that table is still broken in the scene before it got broken, or something like that happens. And I think Cynthia Rothrock talked about that because she got her start in Hong Kong and then came to the States and made movies, and she said it was like a completely different approach. And I think Jalal Murray was somebody that she worked with initially. So he was like, this is, and of course I think she tells this really great story about working with Bolo Young on, I think it was Tiger Claws 2. And Murray hadn't gotten the money from the producers to pay everybody yet, and I guess Bolo Young was pissed that he wasn't getting paid, and he refused to shoot. And I guess Cynthia Rothrock's mom was on the set that day, and she came up to Rothrock. She says, "Something like, Bozo's really pissed that he's not getting paid." He was like, "Don't call him, don't say that." She was like trying to get him to stop, or whatever. But she said it was like a kind of an eye-opening experience to come to America and learn what the film industry was. And you almost kind of wonder with her, because of where her career arc ended up going here in the States, where she never quite broke through. Whether it was Irresistible Force that didn't get caught, picked up as a TV show after the pilot by CBS, or the Stallone movie that was supposed to happen but didn't happen. You wonder if she had sort of stayed in Hong Kong, like Jackie Chan, or just kind of did more films there through the '90s. That if when Rumble in the Bronx breaks through, suddenly she comes over here and almost becomes like a bigger star, because she kind of could have come off the back of that wave, as opposed to by the time Jackie Chan is out, she's been in America for so long that there isn't any kind of novelty or anything there.
Yeah, and it's on one hand, it's like, yeah, you wish she had did more or gotten further, but she's one of those actresses that when you go back, like you can't just watch one Cynthia Rothrock movie. You go, you watch Righting Wrongs, and you're like, oh my God, I got to watch another. And then you watch Undefeatable and China O'Brien. So what she did do, I mean, it's some really great stuff, and you can, program your whole, evening with a Cynthia Rothrock triple feature, marathon. So it would have been nice if she did, but like, and yes, I kind of do kind of lean towards more of her Hong Kong stuff. But again, that's kind of like, going back to just like knowing how to kind of utilize your stars and kind of play to their strengths.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think that's a big piece. I mean, obviously, I mean, you think of Yes, Madam, that she did with Michelle Yeoh, who now Michelle Yeoh is an Oscar winner, and you watch the two of them in a movie together, and they're equal talents. Like they're equally, good. And so but the career progression was different because Michelle Yeoh stayed in Hong Kong longer, and then she gets Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which was kind of this breakthrough for so many names. It was kind of like a second Rumble in the Bronx in a way, right? Because there's a bunch of names that came down. Chow Yun Fat was in that one, which I mean, we know of him right from his John Woo films, but most the wider audiences didn't really know him from those. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. But like you said, Cynthia Rothrock, yeah, you take the Pepsi challenge with her 80s and 90s stuff with pretty much any name out there. I mean, I would say even some of the bigger names, like I mean, Schwarzenegger, obviously he has some of the all-time classics with like Predator, Commando, Terminator 2, those ones. But maybe some of those other names that we think of as action stars, like her stuff, you definitely you got to put it up there with that stuff.
And like Jackie Chan, she's Cynthia Rothrock. She's her own brand. She's not trying to be pigeonholed into something she's not. And whether she's playing like a henchman in like maybe like her earlier movies, but she's always kind of like that plucky, like no nonsense woman. But when the chips are down, like she can just fight with like a ferocity, and she's just like a little powder keg, and it's really fun to watch.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, she was, a elite athlete, well versed in using weapons and her martial arts abilities, and so she could do any scene really. And it was a matter of like, yeah, like did the director know how to use her properly? Because obviously, like Sammo Hung, in Millionaires Express, he saw something in her, and he was like, no, you and I are doing a scene together, and he saw that potential there. I think Richard Norton is another one who saw her potential and was like, a lot of times movies are going to want me because I'm the big Australian guy who knows martial arts, and so they want me in the movie with my Canadian tuxedo or my leather vest with no shirt on underneath or whatever. But he looked at it as like, no, Cynthia Rothrock is a real talent here. She's the one who's got the skills. And he would almost kind of like when they would have scenes together, stuff like that, he was like, no, this scene's only going to work if she's the one carrying it.
Yeah, and it to me, she brings like a different flavor. Like to guys like you and me, we like we pretty much once we get on a kick of something, we pretty much go through somebody's filmography, and but very few uh, stars at that time, had kind of uh, like a filmography like her, and like you said, it had a nice blend of Hong Kong and American style action, and she's definitely one where you'll get the bug if you see the first kind of like two of her best stuff, you'll just go right through her filmography.
Yeah, yeah, and what's great is a lot of the stuff's available now. China O'Brien 1 and 2, I think, are going to get Blu-rays. I don't know if it's through Vinegar Syndrome.
Yeah,
One of them has announced it.
yeah, Vinegar Syndrome. I think
Yeah.
it's coming out later in the month, I believe.
Oh, okay. So it's even that close. So yeah, because I mean, most of her stuff is on Tubi, right? I think the Rage and Honor films are on Tubi. I think the Lady Dragons are on Tubi. Yeah, I think the one that she did with PM is on Tubi. And also like even things like Dark Vision. Was it Dark? No, what was it called? The one that she does with uh Fred
Night
Williams,
Vision.
Night Vision, yeah,
Yeah,
not
night.
Dark Vision,
Yeah.
Night Vision, yeah, yeah. So a lot. I mean, you could spend a good night doing her Tubi stuff, because she's got a lot of good stuff on Tubi. Stay away from maybe like a Cool Cat Saves the Kids or something like that. Like if we see, you know. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, my daughter's into those cool cat movies, and because she likes bad movies like I do, and she was like, "You have to see this." I was like, "I'm good, I think."
Well, I mean, I think, like you talked about how like when you get on a kick, you've got to kind of do it. I mean, there is that part of me that's like, well, I want to do pretty much every Rothrock film on the site. At some point get them all covered, but I kind of feel like, yeah, the Cool Cats ones can wait until I get some other ones reviewed first.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the and that just kind of goes to like, the whole wealth of what's out there in the genre. I mean, there's people like Cynthia Rothrock that kind of crank these out for a certain amount of time, or like uh, Jackie Chan, who was able to kind of like over time kind of tweak the usual formula and give him like some longevity. And then then you have like sadly guys like Bruce Lee that never really got to show what he could do, but it's almost like I guess, musically, like, Kurt Cobain or somebody, like, just kind of died at the peak of their fame. And, somebody were to, it's just like with the Beatles, when they released they re-released the last Beatles song, they're still re-releasing the last, quote unquote, the last Beatles song. So it's always that taste of what could have been. And I think that's kind of, the Brucesploitation is kind of, the those Free as a Bird and whatever the new Lost Beatle track was. They were kind of like that version, musically of a Brucesploitation movie.
Yeah, because you like to think if John Lennon hadn't been killed in the early '80s, you'd like to think with the way the '80s went, right, where you had like Paul McCartney putting out new music, you had Harrison putting out music. I mean, even I think Ringo put out a song in the late '80s as well. I think. So they were all putting out new stuff, and you think like the Traveling Wilburys, where George Harrison kind of forms this group of people that he was friends with who are in the music biz. There probably would have been like a late '80s, early '90s Beatles reunion, and who knows what that music. You have to think that things would have cooled between the tensions would have cooled between maybe Lennon and McCartney and whoever else that there those issues were, and of course obviously also money would have been a piece of it too. That like, oh, if we toured America as the Beatles, we would make so much money. But yeah, you feel like there would have been something in there that we didn't get.
Yeah, and that's always kind of like the thing where, you were saying like, the Dr. Perky, the Dr. Pepper, like Bruce Lee is the Dr. Pepper. Bruce Lee's the Dr. Perky, but like if you don't have the Dr. Pepper on hand, you'll gladly take the and then some people like, me, like once we get a taste of the Dr. Perky, we're like, okay, you know what? I think I'll get a 6-pack of it.
Right, exactly. Or because there's that sense of it too, where like Dr. Pibb, if you go to, I think like AMC Theaters has Dr. Pibb instead of Dr. Pepper, and it's like they do like different concoctions or mixes with it, and it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, all right, well, I'm stuffing my face full of popcorn anyway. Like my taste buds aren't going to be that discerning when it comes to whether it's Dr. Pepper or Dr. Pibb, even if I'm paying like $15 for this large soda.
Well, I should say that is Mr. Pibb. He did not get his PhD.
That's right. I always say that. That's right. I always say that. I always say Dr. Pibb when it's just Mr. Pibb. Yeah, I love that part as well. That they were just like, yeah.
Dr. Pepper went through 7 years of medical school, to be called Dr. Pibb. Dr. Pepper, Mr. Pibb did not. So
right, exactly. Mr. Pibb is not going to try to put on airs and say that he's a doctor. Insist that you call him doctor. Right? He's Mr. Pibb. Exactly. Well, why don't we'll take a break here, and then when we come back, we're going to get stuck in on our film here, The Dragon Lives Again. So, yep, we'll be right back. My newest novel, Don's House in the Mountains, is available now. It follows Don Veazey, who after 20 years has finally made it as a writer, going from an AP English teacher to richer and more famous than he ever could have imagined. In the process, his wife Lois, feeling alienated and resentful of her husband's success, has filed for divorce, forcing Don to move to a house in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. With time alone to reflect, he's able to see how his new wealth and fame has affected his life in ways he never expected. Maybe the biggest of these is his new house, which is bigger and nicer than anything he's ever had in his entire life, but the longer he lives there, the more he gets the sense that it might have magical powers. But that can't be right. A house can't have magical powers, can it? Pick up Dawn's House in the Mountains today. You can find it at Amazon in paperback and in Kindle. It's the early 90s in LA. The war on drugs is raging, and Detective John Bainbridge is the LAPD's secret weapon against crime. Former Special Forces in Nam, he's a cop on the edge. When he and his partner Geary uncover a potential human trafficking ring, it doesn't take long before John Bainbridge realizes this thing goes all the way to the top, which doesn't scare him. That just means they'll fall that much harder when he takes them down. Part send-up and part love letter to early 90s action films, Bainbridge will take you back to the golden days of Canon, PM Entertainment, and AIP. You can get it in paperback or on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited from Amazon. Follow the link in the podcast description. All right, we are back, and so we're going to get stuck in on our film here. Has two names. It's The Dragon Lives Again or Deadly Hands of Kung Fu. I think the title on... I believe that the title on YouTube is Dragon Lives Again, I think.
And yeah, I think there was... That's what I found it on YouTube.
As Dragon Lives Again. And then it lists it as being available on Tubi, but as far as I know, the Tubi version is in Spanish, I think. Is that correct? Is it?
Well, it would probably make more sense in Spanish.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we're gonna be digging in on this. I'm gonna try my best at a synopsis for this here, and probably Mitch, I might have to stop from time to time to see if I can get an assist here. But this movie is
give it a whirl.
Yeah, and just to give everybody a heads up here, neither of us, as far as I know, at least I can speak for myself, we weren't doing any drugs or anything like that in watching this movie. This was not some kind of LSD-induced conversation about what we want a Bruce Lee movie to be, or like a kid like playing with his toys and putting all the characters together to make something here. This is what this movie is. So. Yeah, I'll just kind of dive in here and see what happens. So this movie, Bruce Lee has died, and he is in the afterworld, the underworld. He's played by Siu-Lung Leung, who is listed as Bruce Leong in the credits here, but he's doing the part of Bruce Lee, and it says in the thing here that he opened a gym. I didn't quite get that from the movie. Is that what he does? He opens a gym?
I don't think so.
No, I don't remember that. So somebody was trying to make sense of this, that said he opened a gym. But what I know is like he kind of like he's there dead. So apparently when you go to the underworld, you're unconscious, and then you wake up, and he wakes up where the king of the underworld is there. And of course the big conversation at that point is that he's got a really great big nunchuck. So his nunchucks are very big. Another part of his anatomy might also be very big as well, which is going to come up from time to time as part of the conversation. But he gets his nunchucks back, and he goes to as we talk about, like the saloon or the bar, the noodle house, where he encounters Popeye and Qui-Gon Chang from not played by David Carradine, but an Asian actor essentially playing. Is it Qui-Gon Jinn? Is that who I'm saying? The Kung Fu: The Legend Continues guy. Qui-Gon Chang. Kane. Yeah. So Kane. Yeah. So he encounters them, and we know we're already in for it. We don't know what's going on here, but it's Popeye. And these are two Asian actors playing them. And then Zatoichi, the blind swordsman, shows up as well, and there's like a fight. There's stuff happening there. But essentially, what we understand is that Bruce Lee wants to get back to Earth. He doesn't want he doesn't want to be dead and living in the underworld. So he wants to get back to Earth. At the same time, we've got a series of baddies here, and these baddies are other characters from popular 70s properties at that time or before. So we've got the Godfather, played by Chinese actor, James Bond, who's actually played by a Caucasian actor in that case. So James Bond actually is I don't know if he's a Brit or whatever, but also we have Emmanuel, of all people, right? Emmanuel makes an appearance here, and we've got Dracula. And maybe I broke the news on Dracula too soon, because he kind of comes up later. But we've also got the Exorcist. So if you remember the Exorcist, the priest in there, and I guess Emmanuel works for the Exorcist. Is that how that works? Is he like her pimp? Is that that's not exactly explained, but the idea is that these. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it was the Godfather. I think she was the Godfather's girlfriend. Okay. Maybe Yeah, I mean, it all kind of runs together. At some point, your sanity just kind of like goes off the rails.
Exactly. So we have a king of the underworld, right? And so Bruce Lee wants the king of the underworld to send him back to Earth, which he's not really fond of doing. But also these baddies here want to take over the underworld from the king as well. So everybody's trying to curry favor with Bruce Lee because they feel like he's the tipping point that will allow them to take power. So first you've got the baddies who try to influence him, and they use Emmanuel first to try to seduce him. And the funny thing is, Emmanuel actually succeeds in seducing him, except that the other guys are watching from behind a beaded curtain, and Bruce Lee catches them staring at him, and he realizes what's going on. He kind of gets up with his, points, does the Bruce Lee point. And he's like, "Hey, you guys, I understand what you're trying to do here, or whatever." So they offer him a chance, and he says no. And then the baddies decide, well, maybe a good way for us to kill the king is to send Emmanuel to the king, because he's kind of a lewd, kind of, a creepy old man who has a pond full of women, of naked women, or a pool full of naked women, plus 2 wives. And so, Emmanuel shows up and thinks like, okay, this is great for me. I'll marry Emmanuel. Well, and she tries to essentially, I mean, I don't know if the best way to boink his brains out. I don't know, like, kill him through sex is essentially the idea. Is that she thinks if she can have sex with him harder and fast enough that he'll die. Unfortunately, Bruce Lee is wise to this, and he comes in and stops the situation. And so then the baddies decide, well, we've got to call in Dracula, right? This is our best bet here. Dracula is going to be the best bet to take out Bruce Lee. So he does with a series of what they call zombies, who are just men in skeleton costumes. And they try their best. Now this is something I'm not sure if I caught properly here. Does Bruce Lee, so the baddies kind of get their hands on him, and Dracula comes to, what is he trying to do? Is he trying to bite Bruce Lee? Is he trying to kill him? I don't know, but the question is it his foot, or maybe his what they call his third foot that dispatches Dracula when he attacks him?
Yeah, it was a third leg is what it was insinuated as, and I think they leave it up to the viewer because I think it did have a shoe on him on it. So I don't know if anybody else's third leg would actually have a shoe, but yeah, like you said, like the Bruce Lee's appendage, shall we say, is a running theme in the movie.
Exactly. So eventually, he has his fight scenes with the bad guys. He's able to beat them. And I forgot to mention too, he defeats Dracula dressed as Kato from the Green Hornet. So we have that as well. But so I'm trying to remember. He defeats the baddies, and then the king shows up with the king's, like, his guys, who are like in these big white outfits, and they want to defeat him. Is that what was it? The king's guys that were in those white outfits, or was that another baddie that I can't remember? I'm trying to think who.
Well, I think that they, you know, Emmanuel, Godfather. You forgot to mention Clint Eastwood's in this.
That's right.
Too.
Clint Eastwood is also one of the baddies. That's right.
I think they turned the King of the Underworld against Bruce.
That's right.
Lied to him, so now he thinks like whether he slept with his wife or there was some kind of this. Yeah, because doesn't somebody turn into the wife and she tries to seduce him? I don't know. Anyway, but right. At this point, he's hot under the collar at Bruce, and then he unleashes the army of mummies.
That's right. There's mummies. That's what they were. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so fortunately, we think
Bruce none of us were on drugs at this point.
No, exactly. No. And the great big fight scene we get at the end is not only do Popeye and Kane from Kung Fu show up to help, but also the One-Armed Swordsman has shown up. So we're getting kind of everybody in here, and after everything is done and they win, I don't know if it's spoiler alert here, but when Bruce Lee wins, the king says, "Okay, you can take my throne and you can be king." He's like, "Well, I don't want to be king. I want to go back to Earth." And so yeah, they send him back to Earth. It's kind of like a Quentin Tarantino-esque ending, right? Where it's like, killing Hitler, or killing defeating the people who attack what was it, the family. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. The Manson. Brad Pitt takes out the Manson family because before they could kill, the Sharon Tate. It's kind of that kind of an ending there, which kind of makes you think maybe that's kind of where Tarantino gets some of that stuff from, is these kinds of endings. But it's also a very Wizard of Oz-esque ending because the king shoots him way up in the air, and you just see everybody at Oz or the underworld, waving. It's like bye, So it's like, yeah, it kind of would funny if Bruce Lee was like, I don't know how this thing works, I can't get down, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny to hear you just say all that out loud.
It's amazing. I mean, this is what this is one that you reviewed on your site. It's not in the book, but you gave this one 3 stars. I really enjoyed it. I mean, what were your thoughts overall?
Well, now I would give it 4 stars, of course,
Yeah.
because but like I was, I think at that time, like I didn't. Okay, let me put it to you this way: like when you're watching this movie and something happens, like Dracula trying to bite Bruce Lee on the dick, and then his dick kicks him in the face, you just accept it. Like you're like, okay, because you're already invested. You're like, okay, well, what haven't we seen yet? But the test of this movie, and we're I think we're really kind of living up to it now, is how does this movie sound at the water cooler
Right.
the next morning at work? What did you do this weekend? Oh, I watched Dragon Lives Again. And you try to tell them what happened,
Right.
they would mandatory drug test you
Right.
like
Right.
2 minutes later. And that's the strength of really a WTF movie, is like, does it live up to it's not even the elevator pitch. It's like I said, it's like a water cooler movie. Like, yeah, a lot of the water cooler movies now would be like Poor Things or Oppenheimer or something. Like, this is something I would say, like, I actually told somebody about this at work, and they just like looked at me like don't ever open your mouth again.
Right. It's funny. I texted my friends. Let me see if I can find the because it wasn't that long. It was last night. I texted them to say I was like so I was like, I just watched the most bonkers movie ever. The Dragon Lives Again. Bruce Lee, after he dies, is stuck in the underworld and has to fight Dracula, James Bond, the Godfather, the Exorcist, and Clint Eastwood. But he has Popeye on his side. It's like, and that doesn't even get into the phallic elements of it. And I mean the thing about him being well endowed, it's like, like the two wives of the king. I don't know if I guess one of them is the queen, right? And then the other one's just another wife or another, whatever. But like all
Nice.
yeah, they try to trick him, and they have like this tea that I guess if you drink it, it makes you look ugly, and both of them end up feeding it to each other, and then they're getting like black paint on their faces. It's like, but not like blackface. It's kind of more like halfway doing the Frank Gorshin episode of Star Trek, right? We have the white face and the
Yeah.
black. Yeah, right. That's kind of what it is. Like half of the face is painted black, or the other one it's like, yeah, it's a weird thing. But they're sitting there just saying like they just want to see his dink. Like they just want to like, can we just know if it's as real as it is, that kind of thing. Which is just again, like, yeah, like I wonder if that's something you hide from the elevator pitch, but then it's like you start reading the script and you're just like, okay, I mean, it's kind of funny to think about like the Madam Web movie that came out where like the stars in it talked about how like they thought they were getting into one movie, and then when they started shooting, they were like, boy, this script really isn't working or anything like that. Because like, can you imagine like, like you think you're doing one movie, and the next thing you know, it's just all about Bruce Lee's dink, and it's like
Well, the wives actually provide the best exposition probably of all time when they look at each other and say, "Oh, is that Bruce Lee?" He goes, "Oh, well, when you go to the underworld, your face changes."
right.
To excuse the fact that nobody looks like who they're supposed. Not even Bruce Lee, and Bruce Leong looks like him, but like Clint Eastwood is Asian now. Clint Eastwood died apparently.
Right. What's the other piece of it is like you're
Popeye died. Apparently, all these wonderful pop culture characters
right.
dead. Not only did they die, but they were so awful that they went to hell.
Right. And then they die again. Like Clint Eastwood dies again. Because they talk about
Yeah,
sending his body to Mexico, and it's like, wait, but where else do you go when you? And other people were dying in the underworld as well, which didn't make any sense.
yeah, and it's once you get to that level of wait, that didn't make sense. We've already talked about Bruce Lee fighting alongside Popeye. That makes perfect sense. I got that. It's what happened to his body after he died.
Right, exactly. And I mean, one of the amazing things is like, you know, I remember when when I was talking about the Avengers, the first Avengers movie, and I was saying how like this is kind of like the greatest collection of characters since the Laugh Olympics, you know, and it's interesting because Laugh Olympics comes out the same year as this movie. And I mean, I can't imagine that in Hong Kong that they were being influenced by Battle of the Network Stars, because that's where, Laugh Olympics got its idea from, was that like, oh, let's do our own version of Battle of the Network Stars, but only it's the Hanna-Barbera Network Stars. But I remember like in the first when they did the first real world reunion for the seasons 1, 2, and 3. So it was at New York, L.A., and San Francisco. Judd from the San Francisco season, who people would know him now as a comic book writer. I think he had some really successful runs on like Green Lantern and Green Arrow. But he was joking that the real world reunion was like Laugh Olympics, where you get to see like Yogi the Bear and Scooby Doo and for once in a cartoon. But that's kind of what the Avengers reminded me of Laugh Olympics, and it is kind of funny that this thing comes out the same year, and it's a similar kind of energy of just like would you expect to see? I mean, think about a movie with with Marlon Brando, and The Godfather and like The Exorcist and Clint Eastwood all together playing their own parts as baddies that get defeated by Bruce Lee.
Well, it's almost like copyright infringement, the movie.
Right. Yeah.
Because not only are the characters popping up, but the theme songs too.
Yes.
They have like, the Ennio Morricone's Dollars trilogy theme. They have even Kung Fu Fighting.
Right.
Whenever they show Bruce's nether region, that you hear
Right.
the it's like, yeah, it's so nobody, somehow this movie escaped all these people's lawyers. It's
Right.
thank God, because I mean, the only movie I can really kind of equate it to is maybe like Ready Player One, where you have all these pop culture, but even that is taking place inside a computer server. This is quote unquote real world, actually hell, the underworld or whatever. But yeah, it's like seeing all these characters pop up, kind of alongside each other is just kind of, yeah, it's one of those kind of chef kiss moments of WTF cinema.
Right. Well, and one of the things I was thinking about is like, well, it's interesting that there's no comic book characters in this, but then I realized that Superman doesn't come out till 1978. And kind of before that, like, you had like, some stuff that was like, like the Hulk, or you had, Spider-Man, things like that, but they weren't like the kind of big property kind of things that a movie like this would have looked at and said like, oh yeah, we need to have Spider-Man in this or something like that. Like obviously today, would have those kinds of characters. So that was one interesting thing, is that we think of comic book characters as just always being part of the zeitgeist, but and they were. I mean, it's not that they weren't part of the zeitgeist. I mean, the only one I could think of that would have potentially belonged in here would have been the old Batman from the 60s. But I wonder, with that being a TV show, if it even made it to Hong Kong. I know it had a resurgence in the 70s, I think, in England, when it was released there, or maybe like late 60s, early 70s. But I don't know if it even made it to Hong Kong. So it's kind of funny that we don't get any comic book characters there. But it was an interesting element of that I think nowadays, if this thing was being made, you'd at least have Batman probably.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned it, because it's almost like I think it came out in 77, so it's probably made in about 76. Uh, if it had been made 2, even 3 years sooner, you would probably have gotten Luke Skywalker or Darth Vader in there. You would have gotten Superman. So it's just funny where the kind of the pop culture trail kind of like ends, and because it was definitely taking the and I think too they were even using bits of the Man with the Golden Gun theme. So
Yes.
that's like right, like, yeah, that was the most recent at that time James Bond movie too. So
Yeah, and actually, now that I think about with the Batman thing, they did use Kato. They used Bruce Lee as Kato, and there was a crossover episode between the Green Hornet and Batman. So yeah, maybe they just maybe they had to draw the line somewhere, and Batman was where they decided to draw the line. We're not gonna put Batman in here. But I mean, the one that I was most surprised to see was Emmanuelle. I thought that was really cool that they thought enough of her movies at that time. They were big enough in the 70s that they put her in the film.
Oh yeah, I mean they were, and you also have to think too. There's a whole slew of fake Emmanuel movies too. But
Right.
the real ones have two M's in the title, and the fake
Right.
ones have one M.
Right.
So this just goes along with that. It's like a crossover event, like
Right.
I think she's credited with two M's, but this definitely feels like one of those one M Emmanuel movies.
Right, exactly. Well, right, because in their case, right, like they're using it as the character the way that they're using the Godfather and everybody else. And it was like, well, yeah, well, that's the character. But it was one of those things where, like, when they introduce her, I was like, oh, that's Emmanuel that they're using there, which I thought was really really a cool idea. And of course, she's the one who's almost the most deadly because she's the one who's almost the most successful. I mean, she would have succeeded in seducing Bruce Lee if the other guys hadn't just been hanging around watching, which I just thought was really great too. That they're just like, instead of like staying out the layer and waiting for her to come back and say that she was successful, they've got to watch the proceedings and see what happens between her. But then, of course, later when she almost able to defeat the king as well.
Well, I mean, too, I mean, for us now looking back, that almost seems like a deep cut, but at that time, like the mid 70s, that was the big softcore movie. I mean, that was just when, kind of porno just became porno chic, like, Deep Throat, Devil and Miss Jones. So Emmanuel was like the big softcore movie. So it makes sense that she would be there.
Yeah, and I mean, thinking about some of the, like The Exorcist. I mean, I, I mean, obviously, I think of like, what was it, Dead Alive, right, where there's the priest who's like, I kick ass for the Lord, right? Didn't you see that ass kicking priest? But I mean, the fact that one, he's called the Exorcist. That's one thing that I loved about it was that his character was referred to as the Exorcist, not as like a uh, that not as like his priest name or anything like that, but he's the exorcist. And he and the Godfather are kind of like these apex, heads of this gang thing. But also the idea too that I kind of wonder if it was like a message on the Catholic Church that the Godfather's like back on the real, um, uh, in the real world, we were used to running things. And I was like, well, of course, the Godfather makes sense as somebody who's used to running things, but the Exorcist was running things as well. So it's like it was a great, the whole concept of it. I mean, I would just love to see like for this upcoming, obviously Vin Diesel doesn't listen to this podcast, but while you're making this Fast X Part 2 or Fast 11 or whatever you're calling it, consider having a priest in a long robe. If the movie's going to take place in parts of Rome anyway, have a kick-ass priest in there and call him the Exorcist too.
Yeah, just get Russell Crowe. He can be the Pope's exorcist.
Yeah. Right, because this
Get
is
Al Pacino. He can still be, Michael Corleone.
yeah, because I mean this Exorcist is like Russell Crowe's Exorcist is probably like the coolest Exorcist since this Exorcist here. That he's it's been that long since we've had a cool Exorcist, I guess, and I keep referring to him as Exorcist instead of priest, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I think once you've performed an exorcism, you are an exorcist.
Right,
It's just there's no
exactly.
going back. So you could call him Father this or that, but yeah, I mean, you're just the exorcist at that point.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the Dracula too. I wanted to mention the Dracula because I don't know about you, but I got some real like Christopher Lee Hammer vibes from this Dracula.
Absolutely, and that was basically the only game in town for vampires. I mean, you have like the Jack Palance one on TV or whatever, but like Hammer, like mid 70s, they were still cranking those things out.
Yeah, and I mean, you have to love the way they introduce that, where again the baddies are just hanging around. It's like, well, if this doesn't succeed, Dracula will stop him. And it's like, oh, Dracula's in this too.
And it's funny because he's like the one public domain character, I
Right.
think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's again, yeah, like you said, like you mentioned, like the Hammer Dracula would have been the one that people would have been seeing a lot. But I mean, yeah, because it's interesting because like the Godfather, I guess technically is public domain because it's just named the Godfather. And they don't really go. I mean, the way he looks, he doesn't look anything like the Brando Godfather. He looks like some kind of like kind of, I don't know
Like a
where that
nightclub owner or something. Yeah.
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and then of course, we get these different fight scenes with them. So of course we have Bruce Lee in one of the scenes in the noodle house. He's confronted by Zatoichi, the blind swordsman, and they kind of jump off screen, and the next thing you know, they're out like in a desert area with rocks or whatever, which just adds to this like surreal, dreamlike quality of the film that you go from a noodle house to like this area with like rocks and stuff like that, and then you get the fight scene between the two of them.
Yeah, I think almost, I'd say half of the fights were like take place in this quarry kind of setting. And I think, it's just one of those things where they probably cranked out all these fight scenes with people in different uh, costumes and everything, and then just kind of it's one of those movies where you want to say that it's been cobbled together or kind of like because it has a feeling of like a paced up movie where they use pieces of this movie, but no, it actually has a pretty solid follow through, and just when you think it's going to be kind of goes off the rails, it gets even crazier. And like, but there is like a logic to it. Like I said, like when you're watching it, it all kind of makes sense. But when you're trying to explain it to your psychiatrist later, they're getting the white coats and stuff.
Well, because that's the best part of it is like, for example, there's a scene where Bruce Lee is just sitting with with the Godfather, with the Exorcist. I can't remember if Clint Eastwood was in that scene as well. I'm trying to think, but they're kind of offering him a chance to. Oh, no, Clint Eastwood is there because when they offer him a chance to join the gang and he says no, Clint Eastwood pulls a gun on him, and the Godfather's like, no, 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 let him go, because they know they've got Dracula up their sleeve if they need to use him. But it's kind of funny where you're like, like, oh, what is Bruce Lee gonna, Bruce Lee's gonna turn down the offer from these guys. But it's such a great thing where he's kind of, the Bruce Lee character, he's kind of like slumped in his chair, and then he sits up and he starts giving the point. And he's got the voice that the actor like kind of really does like the kind of voice that the voiceover that you get from those Bruce Lee movies. He's like, listen, you guys, I don't want anything to do with your gang. Just trying to get out of here. I don't, whatever. And he gets up to go away. But it's like you have to remind yourself. It's like you think of any kind of Bruce Lee movie or movie like this, the Hong Kong movie, where it's like there's maybe like a triad boss or somebody or some kind of crime boss who's there with his gang and he's offering Bruce Lee a chance to join them. But this gang is the Godfather, Clint Eastwood, the Exorcist, and I can't remember if James Bond was in that scene as well. I think maybe he was out delivering cash or something.
Yeah, it's one of those things like you kind of to it earlier, like when you're like kind of playing in your sandbox and you got like all your toys, like, and I was that kind of kid, like I wouldn't just play with Star Wars. I'd bring my Dukes of Hazzard guys out and like my monster toys and Godzilla. So Godzilla would be fighting the Duke boys, and but it has that feeling of like a 6-year old like playing in the sandbox, like what he would see in his head, maybe not the Emmanuel stuff, but yeah,
Right.
like what I mean. It's
Yeah.
like it's just kind of like when you're freed of things of like copyright or like coherency or like good taste, what you can come up with.
Yeah, it's funny because you one of the things right now is everybody's talking about sort of like what is Disney going to do now? There's sort of this idea of like, oh, has the comic book thing peaked, or what is Disney's going to be able to recover or whatever? And of course, everybody's talking about the DC thing as well. But the thing is that Marvel, I mean, Disney owns the rights to all of the Marvel characters now. I think, except for some of the Spider characters, I guess it's sort of like a deal that they have with Sony. But otherwise, they own the
I
rights to them.
don't think they want Madam Web.
Right, exactly. Yes, or Morbius, right? Yeah. But they own the rights to those characters. They own the rights to the Star Wars characters. They own the rights to the Predator. They own the rights to Indiana Jones. I mean, looking at just this whole collection, I mean, they technically, interestingly enough, they own the rights to the old Batman TV series because that was a Fox really that was owned by Fox as a distributor. So they actually technically own the rights to that element. Now what they could do with that, I mean, I don't know if they'd have the right to Godfrey Ho scenes from that into, or if they have like a Adam West impersonator play that Batman in this show, movie, but I mean, this movie is the blueprint to what could save Disney, I think. I mean, if Disney needs saving, I don't know necessarily if Disney needs saving, but I mean, the kind of movie that if they had the right people involved, that they could make with all of their characters. I mean, they should be doing Laugh Olympics and stuff like that with their characters because it would be like some. I think people would really enjoy it, and whether it's direct to their their Disney Plus streaming thing or if they actually put it in the theater. I mean, I would go see that in the theater if they made this movie with all their characters, or they made a Laugh Olympics with all their characters. I would definitely go see that in the theater.
Well, I guess you get a taste of it with the Spider-Verse movies because there's all the different iterations, but that's just kind of like iterations of one character, and this is
Right.
like a whole buffet of just a grab bag of 70s references. And it'd be interesting if even if they could just get like you said, like the people that they do have rights to it, and this shows you that you don't even need Harrison Ford to be just the fact that you've got some schmo playing Indiana Jones would probably suffice. I mean, if you want to pay some money for Sean Patrick Flannery or something, maybe, but yeah.
Right. Well, right. Because yeah, I was, it's funny because, I mean, if they wanted to really do it, great. Like I know, uh, what was I'm trying to think of the actor's name who was Randall Park, right? Who didn't they recently do like kind of a funny sketch where he was playing John Krasinski's part on The Office? They kind of
Oh
like
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean that would be hilarious if they had him, playing Indiana Jones in a movie like this, where it's like almost like kind of a send up to what was being done here, even though Randall Park's not Chinese, but a send up to kind of what they did here. But he would be great as that. I think he would be hilarious as Indiana Jones in a movie like this if they were going to do it. I mean, yeah, and I mean in the Predator. I mean, what could you do with the Predator? They could be comedic, right? Where the Predator is just you know maybe he's hanging out, but then maybe too, like, I mean, you could do a great scene with the Ewoks and the Predator. I mean, they have, Disney. One of the fears I think with Disney is that because they own the rights to all of these things now, that things are going to get shelved, right? That who knows how long we may go between, Predator movies, or I think there was an Alien. I think Ridley Scott wanted to do another sequel where he did like Prometheus, and then he did the Alien movie. He wanted to do a third movie in there, and they got shelved when Disney bought the 20th Century Fox. So it's an interesting thing that like you've got all of these characters under one roof, but I feel like Disney, I think obviously that they're thinking in terms of being this big, this big uh, multi-billion-dollar juggernaut. They didn't want to think about like what kind of fun we could have with this, but yeah, I mean, this movie here, I mean, you feel like you just send it to like Bob Iger and just be like, hey, you're fighting for seats on your board here. This is what you can do to win everybody over. Is just make this movie.
Yeah, and you got to think too. Steamboat Willie is public domain, so they can throw him in there. They don't have to spend anything.
Right, exactly.
Just
Yes. Well, yeah, I mean that could. I mean, it would be interesting too to see like if they did like spoof version. They could do spoof versions too of some of the ones they don't own the rights to. Which I mean, can you imagine if they, Ty from Co-Episode and I were joking about how Tito Ortiz. If you go to Tito Ortiz's IMDb page, they talk about him as being like the next Vin Diesel or something like that. It's something along those lines. And while that's a bit much, thinking of him as like the poor man's Vin Diesel. I mean, it would be hilarious if they had a movie with all of these characters in it, and they were mocking the Fast and Furious, and they had so it's a producer that called Tito Ortiz the next Vin Diesel. If they had him play like a poor man's Vin Diesel in that movie where he's like saying things like "I live my life a quarter mile at a time," and stuff like that, while all these other characters from their movies are kind of hanging out around him.
yeah, and you just call him Vin Petrol or something
Right,
like that.
exactly. Yes, that would be perfect. Yeah, and I mean, and then of course you just keep making the phallic jokes too. It'd be kind of funny because I mean they could make it in the other direction too with Vin Petrol. Yeah, so, yeah, they could be like, wow, is it really supposed to be that small? It's like, oh, get out of here. I don't know, but yeah, I mean, it's it's a trip like with this movie. And granted, I think it shows like too if you have no concerns about copyright, I don't even know if this would qualify because it would be kind of seen as a spoof. So I think these having these characters in here might fall under fair use as spoof kind of characters.
Well, that's true too. I mean, that could be the argument, but it's one of those movies where it's like I said, like when you're in it, you're just like you just accept it because it's I don't know if it's, Stockholm syndrome or what it is, but you're perfectly okay with it. It's only afterwards when you're trying to like piece together what happened, you're like, am I crazy or did I just see that?
Yes. Well, like one of the things that kind of got me when I was watching it was that like you have the end fight scene where they're fighting the mummies and Popeye's getting beaten up. And I was like, oh, what's going on with Popeye? What's the deal there? And of course, then the can of spinach off to the side. It's like, of course, right? He has to get beaten up so he can eat the spinach, and then like suddenly there's like it was kind of one of the things like Matt, what were you thinking? Like you didn't see that one coming a mile away, and it was like some of the stuff like that would happen where I was like, oh, of course that was gonna happen.
Well, it's like it's funny they play by, the Popeye rules or whatever, like but it's okay, it's okay for Dracula to be seen in broad daylight. It's like wait a second, you went with the Popeye rules, but you're not going with the Dracula rules here. Then again, I guess you could say, it's in the underworld, it's night. I don't know, but
Right, well, exactly. Well, and also the fact that Dracula has zombies, right? Like, which, has an army of zombies that he can call at his disposal as well.
yeah, I don't think they have a Hammer movie like that, but I mean, you just kind of go with, like I said, like when you go back and you're like splitting hairs with this movie, that the hairs have been split before the first frame of film has been shown.
Yeah, and I mean, just thinking about like the script writing process that would have come with this, and the movie has three writers, and so you wonder with them if they were on anything, right? Like if they're just like, let's just take something and just go, or if they even kind of did like kind of what you're talking about, where you just like imagine you're a kid and just like put everybody in the movie that you can, because it is amazing. And I mean, also thinking about some of the ones that they put in that we wouldn't have thought of, like I think in the 70s you wouldn't have thought of Zatoichi as being one that you'd want to have in the film, or the One-Armed Swordsman, but they kind of add that kind of a mix of like influences that weren't from Western pop culture, and then ones that were in Western pop culture.
And it's also interesting to see who is a villain and who is, a good guy. Like Popeye's a good guy, but James Bond's a villain. And I don't know if that's, kind of like, Clint Eastwood's the villain, even though he never played a villainous character. It's
Yeah.
very kind of, it seems arbitrary, but at the same time, like, it's almost like, almost feels like it was like kind of like dodgeball in school, like when you're picking teams. Like he's like, "Well, I'll take Dracula," and he's like, "Well, I'll take the one-armed swordsman."
Right, exactly. Well, there are some interesting things that I was thinking about. So, like, one of the things is with Kane, right, from Kung Fu. That was one of Bruce Lee's, I think, his kind of his bigger insults was that he was passed over for the role of Kane, and they went with David Carradine instead. I think it was kind of this mindset of like, wow, Hollywood is there's this level of racism where it's like, I can be the partner to the Green Hornet, right? I can be like this guy who's like helping the Green Hornet, but I can't be the leader. I can't be like the lead actor in a TV show called Kung Fu, despite the fact that that's what I'm known for is Kung Fu. And I wonder if that was one of those things in this movie where they were kind of writing that wrong by having an Asian actor play Kane, but also play him in on being on Bruce Lee's side. But then the other one I think that's interesting is Popeye, right? Because Popeye is always the underdog, and there's almost a sense of like kind of like with Bruce Lee, maybe like okay, he's the underdog. Same with the One-Armed Swordsman, right? That they're the underdog, which is interesting though because Zatoichi is not the underdog, and I guess maybe that's the sense of like because he's from Japan, right? That Japan is sort of seen as this power that's sort of you know, I don't want to say it looks down on China, but it's kind of like, at that time they would have been superior, right? Because they were really kind of cruising as an economic power. And then the other ones are similar kind of colonial powers, right? Like James Bond. Well, the Godfather, even though he represents America, he also represents England. But then also, Emmanuel representing France, and I guess the Exorcist was French too, right? He had a French accent as well.
Well, I guess that would be maybe Italy, like the Vatican.
Oh, right, that's right.
Yeah,
Yes.
and Dracula would be Transylvania.
That's right. That's right. Yes.
So yeah, that kind of all makes it. And Popeye, he's a sailor, so international waters.
Right.
He's free. He has no nationality.
Right. Exactly.
See,
Exactly.
once we get this far down to the rabbit hole of trying to figure this movie out,
Well,
it's insane.
and for people listening, when we say Popeye, right, we are talking about a Chinese actor with his head shaved, right, wearing a little tiny sailor hat kind of thing, kind of at a rakish angle on his head, and then he's essentially wearing a little kid's sailor outfit, but for the size of an adult. That's what Popeye is in this movie.
And it's you know it's fairly close a representation as just about as the Robin Williams movie. I mean, it's very close.
Yeah.
That sounds weird to say, but it's shockingly close. I mean, I think the Robin Williams one was going more for the vibe of the comic strip, whereas this one is clearly going for the vibe of the cartoons.
Right, because that's probably what they would have seen, right? They would have
Yeah.
probably had like those old cartoons when they were watching. And I think that's the thing is I think one of the things with those Popeye cartoons, when you think of themes in kung fu movies, right, is they're always like these sort of like these underdog characters who get beaten up by like big Bolo Young types, and they somehow manage to like overcome and prevail at the end. The same way Popeye would get beaten up by Bluto for most of the cartoon, and then he would eat his spinach and suddenly like knock him all over the place.
And shockingly, Bluto did not wind up in hell, but Popeye did. So I don't know what what he did in his life as a sailor man. That
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, like I said, it's very arbitrary, but at the same time, it's that if some of the allegiances have been thought out a little bit more, like then again, like you said, with like the colonialism, I think that's probably as close as we're going to get to like making sense of how they're aligned. So
Yes. And I mean the idea of it, I think from a film standpoint that you get all of these different characters in it, and then Bruce Lee, who's just Bruce Lee, right? Like he's not like a special character. I mean, he dresses up like Kato for that one scene, but for the most part, he's Bruce Lee, and it's this like idea that like he is essentially as super as any of these other characters are. He's as like iconic or as big, and he kind of is at the same level as them. Like he can defeat Dracula or he can defeat the mummies or any of those kinds of things.
yeah, and that's a great point too, because he was an idol to so many of us, and he is larger than life, and that to put him alongside with like these kind of uh fictional characters, it's just kind of like a like we were saying before, almost like a tribute to him as you know it, it's just kind of like a pivotal kind of stepping stone to just you know uh martial arts cinema.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it is. It's one of those things where like if you're a fan of Bruce Lee and kind of this movie. I mean, again, this movie is considered like kind of almost like a tribute to everybody who's a fan of Bruce Lee. Is kind of what they say. That for all the people who love Bruce Lee, we're making this tribute to him. I mean, I do kind of wonder too if the people making this, if any of them knew Bruce Lee personally, and if they knew that he liked or didn't like some of these characters. Like I gotta wonder about that too. That like if he was like, oh, I should be doing I should be doing James Bond, or I should be, that kind of thing. What, like you said, like what made them decide to put certain people in there? You wonder if like there was like kind of scuttlebutt about like what Bruce Lee said about some of these things.
And I mean, that's a good point too. I mean, a lot of the like you said, Popeye being kind of an underdog, and but I don't see much of a distinction with Zatoichi, other him being Japanese, because both him and the One-Armed Swordsman kind of overcome handicaps to kind of they're very much underdog characters, but at the same time, yeah, it's one of those things that, like, I think if it made sense, if there was a concrete answer, we wouldn't be talking about it in
Right,
such detail.
exactly.
So
Right. Well, because the one thing about Zatoichi is that he's the one that when Bruce Lee defeats him, they kind of end on cordial terms, right? There's almost like a grudging respect, and he sort of allows Zatoichi to go on his way, which is an interesting, right, a difference there. That with the other ones, he completely dispatches them, right? He's yeah, they either get killed off or they're completely defeated. It's not like he doesn't extend any kind of courtesies to anybody else that he defeats.
yeah, and it would be interesting too because for like younger audiences, because we're both men of a certain age, I won't say out loud, but yeah, for like a younger crowd to see if anybody would even get some of these references. Like Godfather, maybe James Bond, maybe Dracula, but like Emmanuel would probably go over their heads. Zatoichi, One-Armed Swordsman. Uh, so it'd be interesting to see how all of this would play to like, like a teenage, 20 something kind of Gen Z, Zennial, whatever you want to call them. But like, for guys like us, like who get the references, it's just like every time some new character's introduced, it's just like a fist pump moment.
Exactly. Well, because yeah, one of the things I was thinking about with this too is that like when we were growing up, kind of slightly after this film comes out, um, you know, things didn't, popular culture things didn't turn over as quickly. They were starting to, like we were kind of starting to see the beginning of it, right? Where we see video, VHS suddenly becoming not even really taking over the market from the theater, from the big screen, but it was becoming a bigger thing. But you started to see trends in music and things like that starting to turn over a little bit more quickly, but not quite to the extent that they turn over now. It's like you think about like I had an i4 cell phone. I got it in 2012 because my brother didn't want it anymore, so he gave it to me, and I had that i4 up until like 2020. And everybody thought it was just ridiculous that I had that phone. And to be honest, it was ridiculous that I had that phone because it was not in really great shape. But or it worked, but the way Apple ran, right? Like most of the apps didn't work on it anymore. Things like that. Growing up, right? A TV. If you bought a TV in 1975, it was going to last you until 1990. Or if you bought an oven in 1975, that thing would last you until almost 2000. And so there were a lot of things that still existed in the 70s that when you get into the 80s were still popular, understanding, that kind of thing. That when when kids were born kind of like in the late 80s into the early 90s, they start to see things turning over much more quickly. And then if you think of kids that were born in the 90s, it's even more so, right? That like you almost don't recognize, like if you think of 2000 versus 2010, it's amazing to think of that kind of change. That yeah, like for us, in the 80s it wasn't like that. That like there was a lot still from the 70s, the 60s and 70s that were big in the 80s, but then you also kind of see where it starts to change from there. So yeah, I totally know what you mean there though, about like kind of picking up on some of those references.
Yeah, and it's like anything, a lot of things get remade or re-released, and they the younger generations will pick up on them. But uh, some of these are very specific to, like we said, like if it was made 2 years later, we would have gotten more maybe household names like Star Wars or Superman or something like that. And it's just kind of just a very crystallized moment in time when like all these elements could come together and just make this just kind of uh, gumbo of just insanity.
Yes, which I think is the best way to kind of like cap this discussion is that it is a gumbo of insanity, but a great gumbo. It's a gumbo that it's the kind of thing like I'm trying to think of a good example of a food that would be equivalent to it, but it's like one of those things where like if, whenever I show people from outside the US that I work with what a cheesesteak looks like, they all just like are just like, what is that? That makes no sense to them. But when you eat the cheesesteak, right, especially if you get it from a good place, and I will say to people listening, if you get your cheesesteak at the market or cheesesteak corner and you're kind of think it's lackluster, it's because you got your cheesesteak at the cheesesteak corner at the market. You got to go to some of the other places in Philly and get a really good one. But when you get a really good one, it's like this combination of like eating something that's just really good and just like that kind of that endorphin rush of feeling, of having something really good that you ate, combined with this sense of like, I've made some really bad decisions in my life, and I don't know if this was a good one. And this movie kind of has that combination, I think.
Yeah, it's almost like a nacho grande where you just keep putting so many more elements on top of it that there you don't see the nachos anymore. It's like you've got the cheese, the guac, the olives, the beans, the salsa, and at some point the nachos become a formality.
Right. And I remember getting the nachos Belgrade. One of the things I remember was that there was the Taco Bell there's like a chain of convenience stores in Maine called Christie's that I think they were actually in Massachusetts as well, but they got bought out by 7-Eleven. But when they were Christie's, they had a Taco Bell Express inside of them. And that was one of the few things that was on the menu was the nachos Belgrande. But I remember like there'd be that point where you try to eat it with your fingers, but eventually you had to go to the spork, right? Because there was no way, that thing. But with everything that was on top of that, and how the person who was there who really didn't want to be there, was putting that together, you eventually had to go to the spork, and yeah, it was like one of those things where you're eating that thing with the spork and just realizing like, boy, what am I doing to myself? But it's so good.
Yeah, and that describes the movie because, like I said, like I I don't think anybody, uh, that's like a casual fan of just movies in general would be able to sit through this.
Right.
I think you have to have a little bit of a tolerance for martial arts films to begin with, but you also have to kind of just be appreciative of like the grade Z. Like I don't even think like Ed Wood could have came up with some of this stuff. I mean, it's just like there are I can't even call it a bad movie because it's pretty well done, but it's just like I just go back to the WTF because I mean that's what you ask yourself. Every frame of this movie is just like a fever dream of just like just just out there.
Right, right. I mean, it's like essentially like when with the idea of the underworld, right? That Bruce Lee is dead. It's like almost like they took the idea of the blank canvas with that with the underworld, and they just really went to work painting it. Whereas like most people would have like some kind of structure or something, like we would probably use elements of like the devil, or like we would have like these basic premises, and maybe there's some elements in here that are kind of like taken from Chinese tradition of what the underworld is supposed to be like. But really, they just were kind of like, hey, we don't have to have any rules here. And with filmmaking, when you suddenly decide you don't have rules, right? It can go one of two ways, right? It can be like this, where it is just like this beautiful thing that is a combination of like if I made some bad decisions, but I'm really enjoying this and I'm really loving this, and so it's like my life has led to this in a good way and a bad way, maybe almost. But it works, or it could be like something that's just a complete mess. And yeah, like you said, like this is like the Nachos Belgrande, where it looks like a complete mess, but it's so good when you actually dig in and get into it.
Yeah, and it's just kind of fascinating too. It's just kind of like this pop culture relic of, like I said, just this moment in time where all these characters were kind of in the zeitgeist, and like and even it's interesting too as a Brucesploitation movie because a lot of the Brucesploitation movies will work backwards, going
Right.
from okay, Bruce Lee's dead. This is how he began his life. This is how he learned kung fu from Ip Man and all this stuff. Whereas this one goes the other direction. It's like, okay, Bruce Lee's dead. What happens next?
Right. 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 Which in and of itself is a really great idea. And then, like you said, it's like, it from a Bruce exploitation factor, this one really hits the man, we really miss this guy element of it, and we want to celebrate and almost dream like what could happen if he fought his way through the underworld and came back to life.
Yeah, and it's and maybe I guess when you view it as more as the underworld instead of quote unquote hell, it's almost like that hero's journey too, of like Hercules, like all his
Yes.
trials in the underworld. Maybe I'm thinking too much into that, but yeah, there I think there is that trope of like and we see it even in like Conan the Barbarian, him dying and coming, overcoming death and coming back. Even though Mako does all the legwork there, but it is that trope of the hero ascending the underworld and conquering death. So that there is, again, I think we're probably reading way too much into it, but
Yeah, but you know what? I think you make a really great point here because I think, Chinese myth, right? I think they probably have something similar to what you see in the Greek myths of sort of like overcoming, going to the underworld and then like, overcoming something there and returning from the underworld, that that they use here. I never, 'cause, neither I don't know about you, but I'm not really up on Chinese mythology,
no,
unfortunately.
no, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
blind spot for me too.
Right, exactly. But I wonder if there's certain elements of it that they pulled from here that that we weren't sure about, or that we didn't know, and and part of that, right, is that that the end. But then again, like, so they've got this Chinese tradition of the underworld that they're using here, and then they're just throwing in all these pop culture references. And again, be thinking about like the character in these mythology, these sort of these epics who escape the underworld after being in Hades or wherever. And actually, it looks like if you look at the credits here, they list the judge as the Hades judge. So I wonder too if they were borrowing from the Hades underworld, or they're kind of using the similarities maybe when they were bringing it over to America. That they thought Hades is something we would pick up on better than hell. But you know, um, uh, one of the things is like when that character escapes, usually it's some sort of escape process. Here, at the end of the movie, when he's escaping, it's the end of the Wizard of Oz, which is another pop culture thing that they throw in.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's just like all these elements that probably should not work, but it's just done so it just crazily, like just like with this like almost like zeal of like, like kind of like something like maybe, like the yeah, the head of the studio went away on for vacation for 2 weeks and they came back and they had made this on their nose. It has, like you said, there's just like all the rules went out the window with this one.
Yeah,
And thank God.
exactly. Thank God. I mean, I think for people listening, to determine whether or not you think you'd like this movie or not, just that I think the one scene that does it for me is the scene when the baddies are all talking about what to do about Bruce Lee, and they just sort of casually throw out there, well, Dracula can always get him with his zombies. And at no point did we know Dracula was in this movie. They just kind of throw it out there. And if you can hear that part there and say, yeah, I'm going to keep watching. This is working for me. Or like you said, if you do like a kind of a Tiger Woods fist pump when you hear that mention, then this is the movie for you.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense with everything that you've seen before. But yeah, why wouldn't they have Dracula on there? Yeah, duh. Like like you said with the Popeye scene with the spinach finally comes into play. Or, well, yeah, that's what this whole 90 minutes has been building to.
Right, exactly. And it was one of those things where I was like mad at myself where I was like, wow, man, Popeye's really having some trouble over there. I don't know what's going on. Because like, you see like Kane is dispatching the mummies, and Bruce Lee's dispatching the mummies, and they're really doing, the One-Armed Swordsman's doing a good job as well. But Popeye's really struggling, and I'm like, what's going on? Why is Popeye really struggling? And I mean the spinach that he eats is like, it looks like seaweed almost, or like kelp or something that he just like pulls out of the can. It's like this really like wet, soggy, like cans. I mean, they don't mess around. In the movie, in the cartoons, right? It's like just some sort of like thing that flows out of a can into his mouth, and you don't really understand what spinach is. Whereas this, it's like they let you know that he's eating raw spinach out of a can.
And it's just like one of those like cherry on top moments because you're getting near the end there and you're like, yes, it's just like of course we're gonna have and accompanied with the music too. Like I said, there's no qualms about using copyrighted music at all. Like
No.
throughout the movie. I think we mentioned it, but Bruce Lee's usually accompanied by the uh, Enter the Dragon theme song at several points. So it's like, that why wouldn't Popeye have his theme song?
Right, exactly. And of course, Kung Fu Fighting by Carl Douglas, which is a fascinating thing too, right? Because that movie, that song kind of came out, when when Hong Kong films were kind of big, or kind of, it was kind of more like a thing especially for people in inner cities in like New York and those areas where they would go to watch martial arts films. But I think there was also kind of a thing of people wanting to do martial arts, right? Like wanting to learn martial arts, that was part of it as well. And that song just sort of like, yeah, kind of, it's like that one hit wonder kind of deal, that they just kind of throw that in the movie as well.
Yeah, and then that's another kind of like perfect moment in time when it's essentially like a novelty song, but like it encapsulates everything that's of that moment, and it's just kind of uh whether Carl Douglas got paid or not, it's just a perfect reminder of the time and the place.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's the whole thing just works. I think for I don't know, Mitch, as we're wrapping up here, anything that we haven't touched on the movie that you wanted to mention?
I mean that surprisingly there is a little bit of a dramatic element when they mentioned Bruce's womanizing as his Achilles heel. He kind of actually expresses regret for cheating on his wife Linda, which is something that kind of like caught me off guard, like thinking about like this is essentially made to celebrate him, but show that at the same time he was kind of a, a bit of a flawed character as well.
Yeah, that's a good point because also right because they kind of it's funny because they mention that part right, but then of course he's all ready to hook up with Emmanuel at that like which to be honest you could make the point that it wasn't his fault that it was that Emmanuel has charms that she could use, and Bruce Lee would have fallen for it too if it hadn't been for the guys leering behind the beaded curtain watching what was happening.
Yeah, it's just that like that little moment though, it just like kind of hints at like, oh wow, maybe there uh, there's a little bit more to this than just pop culture references and silly kung fu antics.
Right, exactly. Right, because there's almost a sense of like the reason why he's there, right, is because he was not a good husband. That he was sleeping around, and maybe that's also why they had all the phallic things. I mean, the first thing that happens, right, the first thing that happens in the movie is when when he's kind of covered in a sheet, laying on a bed there, and they go to inspect him. The people of the underworld, like the king and everybody, they expect him. Next thing we know, he gets a massive erection. And or either he gets a massive erection or it's his nunchucks. We don't really know what it is, but it's like he's just lying there. Suddenly, this massive tent is erected in his nether regions area.
Yeah, that's the first sign, like if you're gonna like be on this movie's wavelength or not. When they bring up Bruce Lee and he's just just get pitching a tent for all to see in the underworld. It's like if you don't bail out on that, then you'll probably stick through the whole movie.
Exactly, exactly. And if you don't bail out there and you're someone who's looking to stick with it through something like that, you're going to be rewarded. This movie will give you what you're looking for. The way we describe this movie, if that sounds like a good movie to you, trust us, like it's even better than you can imagine because it's hard to really convey how great this is if you like this kind of movie.
Yeah, it's just like I said, it's just every kind of uh, character and just kind of thrown into a blender, and they they just went for it. I mean, they like you said, they didn't care. They're like, who would be great in this movie? Dracula, sure, why not? And you just don't blink an eye because everything that's led up to that moment, it's just kind of it all makes sense on its own terms once you're in it.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is it's like the movie itself doesn't have any rules, right? Like where it's like like we talked about how Dracula can hang out during the day, right? But Popeye needs the spinach to be able to defeat the mummies, right? Like certain rules count and certain rules don't count. But the thing is that like the fact that rules count or don't count is even within itself consistent within the film.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just one of those things where you just go with it,
Right?
and you'll be glad you did.
Exactly, exactly. That's probably the best place to leave it. So, yeah, as we're wrapping up here, Mitch, anything that you'd like to plug?
Well, of course, I've got my new book out, Kung Fu Companion: The Chop Socky Movie Guide. It's kind of in the same vein of my previous books, where it's just kind of 20 plus chapters of dissecting the various directors, stars, subgenres of the kung fu film, and try to give you a bite-sized selection of each one, and let you go from there. So if you want to pick that up, you can go to Amazon, just search my name, Mitch Lovell, in the author page, and that'll come up. And yeah, it's been selling fairly well so far, and hopefully I have another one in the pipe not too long after that.
Excellent. Yeah, and for people listening to, the link to the book will be in the podcast description as well. So you'll be able to, if you're on your phone and you're listening to us on like iTunes or something like that, if you look at the description, the link will be there. You can hit the button there and it'll open Amazon on your phone. So you could pick it up that way as well. And one thing I would say too, because having bought it and read through it a bit myself. One, I mean, I like reading the ones for the movies that I've already seen, because it's like, oh, I can kind of see like, what did you think of them, or even like get reminders of things because maybe I hadn't seen them in a while. But the other thing that's good too is that when you've got something like Tubi, where you've got so many options, and if you're thinking to yourself like, okay, I'd like to watch a Hong Kong movie tonight. I'm kind of, listen to this podcast, I'm kind of interested in seeing some more Hong Kong stuff. You go on Tubi and you see all the options that are there. What's good about your book is you can kind of go through, and if something comes up and it's in your book, you can kind of get a sense of whether you want to watch that one or not. And that's actually, I think, it's a really cool thing to have there, because even though the movies are free on Tubi, they still cost your time if you get the wrong one.
Yeah, and it's Tubi's just like a treasure trove of just kind of weird, oddball stuff. And like you said, this particular movie isn't on Tubi except in a Spanish version. But like I said, that would just add to the overall WTF feel of it.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing too, I'll mention for people that have physical media collections. I know there are a lot of people that collect a lot of Hong Kong films, Shaw Brothers films, Golden Harvest. If you've got that kind of collection, your book is a really great addition. Just similar to like how Bloody Book of Horror is a great addition to like a horror collection. That's another way. I know for me, I got it on Kindle because it works out well for me to be able to kind of thumb through reviews while I'm on the subway or that kind of thing. But I think, and I don't have as big of a physical media collection, but I know a lot of people that listen have really big physical media collections, and this book is definitely a good addition to that.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. Like I said, I try to replicate that feel of the mom and pop video store when you would go in, and they probably have 5 or 6 different titles kind of in a row devoted to the same star or kind of theme, and then you would be off to like the next one. So I try to kind of replicate that kind of feel.
Yeah, it's definitely you're coming back to that time of like you'd be maybe a sleepover party with your friends or something like that, and it's like you go to the video store and you're like, oh, what one are we gonna grab or something like that, and it's like that the most bonkers looking Bruce Lee film would be the one that you grab and you watch, and you're like, and it's like one of those things where it's like either it was really good and everybody's watching it and enjoying it, or it's really bad and like the movie's just kind of on the background while people are like throwing pizza crust at each other and stuff like that.
Well, this one, Dragon Lives Again would be like one of those that would kind of work as either both, because like I think it kind of supports the Mystery Science Theater kind of throwing jokes at the screen too, because it's so off the wall. Yeah. But at the same time, you can, and there's plenty of movies on Mystery Science Theater but that are enjoyable on their own terms, but are just kind of, the atmosphere is heightened by the robots making comments. So I think too, like if you can see this in the same room with as many people, and it's definitely like you and I say, like a beer and pizza movie. This is definitely one of the great beer and pizza movies of all time.
Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of one that I think about. Like, if my friends and I had this in high school, it would have been one of those big cult classics for us, along with like like a Bad Taste or a Blood Diner or something like that. Like this would have been up there as one that like we would have watched over and over again. That we probably would have rented the second VCR so we could make a copy of it from the video store. That kind of thing. Similar kind of like how Els was for you, where it's like you just get it every year. You kind of just always renting it.
Yeah, and like I said too, like if you want to see some weird looks, just describe this plot to just like anybody at work or on the subway or something. Be like, hey, have you seen this? And then just gauge the looks that you get after you don't even have to even get to the part with the Godfather. By that time, they'll already be kind of like moving down the car like
Right.
away from you.
Exactly. Now keep in mind too, if it's a work thing, maybe you don't want to mention Bruce Lee's erections. You might get a call from HR about that one. But
Yeah, tread carefully.
yeah, exactly. Well, perfect. Anything else? Anything else, Mitch, that you wanted to plug?
If you want to catch me on Twitter at the Video Vacuum, and then at Video Vacuum at Blogspot is my blog. And right now I've been doing an ongoing series of trying to watch all of the movies on my shelf here. I've got over 300 of them, so I'm trying to do a different movie a day, and it's called Let's Get Physical, and I'm trying to devote an entire year to watching physical media, and I'm running a little behind right now, but that's to be expected.
Yeah,
I'm
because
always
right, because
running behind.
last year you were to be continued, so you were watching everything on Tubi. You kind of let the physical media collection build up on you, so now you got to catch up on
Yes.
those.
Yeah, so now, yeah, Tubi put me in a hole because I didn't stop buying movies. I just stopped
Right,
watching them. So I
right.
like so now, and I'm even with still getting movies that I pre-ordered with Christmas money back in January. So now they're all starting to show up in the PO box. Now I gotta
Right.
it's like a Hydra. You watch one and another one pops up. So.
Exactly. That is actually very true. That it's like you watch one movie on Tubi and you're like, huh, what else did this person do? And you get like three more movies, right, that come up on IMDb that you put in your queue and you watch. And yeah, and I mean, in your case, being the video vacuum where you watch everything, so it's like you've got like blockbusters like Shazam, Fury of the Gods that's there. Plus you've got like uh, you know like 80s shot on video porn movies or things like that are coming in the mail as well, so you've got all kinds of stuff that you've got that you've got going on your site.
Yeah, it's just, and that's just where my taste goes. Like looking back, maybe I should have, when I started my blog back in '07, I should have just did either horror, action, or just stuck to one genre. But I mean, as you know, this movie proves, like I I might have missed Dragon Lives Again if had I'd only been doing horror movies or doing a specific type of movie.
Yeah.
So I don't. I want to keep myself open to all new walks of weird, wonderful, wild movies.
Exactly. Well, what I find that happens too is that the action ecosystem, the action blogging ecosystem, is the smallest of all of them. And one of the reasons why my site became more action oriented, I always talk about this, is that that's where the engagement was coming in. But it's also funny too, like when I notice like movies that only have like a few reviews, there'll be times where it's like you. Ty and Brett at Comeuppance and the Bulletproof guys will have done a movie, and it's like there's like maybe six reviews and three of them are you guys, and it's like, oh, I better get on this movie and review it at some point because it's like I'm falling behind it if you guys have all covered it. But it's like sometimes that's what happens is like maybe a movie has like eight reviews and the four of us have done the four of the eight, and so people are like, oh well, we keep seeing this name come up for those ones. Whereas like horror, it's like how many times does a horror movie have like 80, 85 reviews, and it's like the same budget, same releasing cadence, everything that like the action movie has, and the action movie has like 15 or 20 reviews. So that's always that one part of it. But I think also too in your case where like you're kind of more than me, where it's like, man, if I watch Shazam Fury of the Gods, I want to at least get a review out of it, if I'm spending my time watching it.
Yeah, it's funny what you said about Comeuppance and Bulletproof. Like just today, I just posted a review for Robo War because I had looked it up not too long ago. I'm like, oh, all these guys have reviewed it, and I haven't. I gotta go back and rectify that. So I did. I just
Right.
did put a review up for Robo War, which would probably pair very well with Dragon Lives Again, since it just so crassly rips off Predator and RoboCop. So
Right, exactly. Yes, with Reb Brown in it, which is just even,
no
uh,
less. Yeah.
yeah, the screaming Reb Brown with a cropped shirt, and I mean, Yeah, I mean that's the thing too, right? Is the Italian, produced movie comes from a similar like I don't know what the right, there's a similar vibe in terms of like how they're ripping things off or borrowing from other places. Like it was kind of a similar thing where it's just like, hey, whatever's big in America, let's just do our own version of it.
And yeah, I mean, that's how you get movies like Robo War, where you're just, your jaw is just on the floor for half the movie because you're like, wow. And I'm,
Yeah.
I'm glad John McTiernan's lawyer didn't see this one.
Right, exactly. Well, because I wondered too if, like, kind of like with the mockbusters, and I've heard that there's some situations with Asylum where they were sued to like have to change the name of the mockbuster, but for the most part, I wonder if there's a sense of like we don't want to draw any more attention to this than is already there. It's almost like like with Robo War, it's like if RoboCop sued, or the Predator, if they sued, then suddenly you know that Robo War even existed, right? Because like none of us would have even known it existed back then, if unless unless it had gotten sued. Like, oh boy, what's to find out in the video store? So I wonder if that's part of it too. It's like if you don't mention it, maybe it goes away.
Yeah, because guys like you and me that would be the first thing on our to be watched list.
Well, exactly. I mean that would be like if we saw a report saying like like that like a similar thing today. Like if we saw a report saying that like maybe like somebody made a movie that was like ripping off the Avengers and we saw that Disney was suing them, the first thing we would do is try to find that movie for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, then you look at like all like the seduction cinema movies like Bra Avengers and stuff like that. And you're just like, well, yeah, I have to check that out.
Right, exactly. Especially Wynorski when he was like he had the Bear Wench series.
Hmm.
Where what was it, the fourth one that was just like essentially like a Golden Girls like flashback episode where he
Yeah,
just
yes. It's like you're so far into this you can just sell outtakes as a actual sequel.
yeah, yeah. 'Cause I just remember that with the Golden Girls, it was like they'd have like one episode a season where you just like the episode would start with the four women sitting around a table, and then you knew if they didn't get up from that table within a couple minutes that it was going to be a flashback episode, and they'd start talking
Yeah.
about things that happened, and it's kind of funny how Wynorski did the same thing with Bear Wench. It was like, oh, remember this one from this movie, and it's like like okay, all right, you got me at this point. If I'm with you on Bear Wench 4, then yeah, you can kind of do whatever you want.
Yeah, and then when it's like Julie Strain and Julie Smith, yeah, okay, I'll watch this again.
Right, exactly, exactly. And the funny thing is that with Julie Strayed, Julie K. Smith, and that crew, they were so like up for anything that like or Brinket Stevens. It's like just like yeah, if that's what we're doing, count me in. I'll do it.
Yeah, and that translates, on the screen so much. Just like those girls are having a blast, getting
Yes.
covered in chocolate syrup and walking around buck naked in nature, and it's just it just makes the whole kind of vibe like even better.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, we've done Wynorski on here. Wynorski's another one where I mean, they can be hit or miss with Wynorski, but like if you go into it and you see the description for it, and that description tells you like, okay, this is something. If that description doesn't make you just immediately switch to the next thumbnail on Tubi, then you probably should watch it, and you're probably going to enjoy it.
Well, just the titles alone, like The Hills Have Thighs.
Right.
What was it? The Devil Wears Nada. So I mean,
Right.
you don't even need a description. You read the title, say okay, and hit play.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny
Cleavage
because
Field, yeah. I mean,
right, exactly. And what's funny is how Fred Olen Ray transitioned out of that to doing Christmas movies. And when you watch one of his Christmas movies, they have a similar energy to those like boobs and butt actioners that he would do. And it's kind of funny to see the same energy put into like a Christmas romance that's like kind of all schlocky and stuff. But like it still is a Fred Olen Ray movie in a weird way.
and it's funny out of all those directors like David Dakota and just so many others that have transitioned to Christmas movies. Wynorski is just still in his wheelhouse, and he's very comfortable to be so.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it'll be interesting. Whatever, I can only imagine what he would do. I mean, I wonder if they did want him to do a Christmas movie and it was just so bonkers that they were like, okay, we're never letting you do this again.
It would probably, involve Santa and his busty elves, or say it would be something, totally that I would watch. So
Yes, I bet you. Yeah, that's a good point because it would be like the Santa Claus, the Santa elves. You'd get like a Julie K. Smith or somebody like that playing an elf in like a mall Santa routine, and they would just be like, we can't put that on Hallmark. Like we can't, like, even if she's got her clothes on, they're barely on. Like this is, what do you mean? She's not naked. Her boobs aren't showing. There's no nipple there, and it's like, no, this is Hallmark. We can't do this.
And all the girls would be after Santa's sack, and it would
Yes, exactly.
it would become a thing, and
Yes, exactly, perfect. Well, maybe this is a good place for us to wrap up here. Hopefully, we'll get that Wynorski Christmas movie at some point. But
Fingers
thank you
crossed.
again, Mitch, for coming on. And again, the book it's a I keep forgetting that. Sorry, it's the Kung Fu
Kung Fu
Companion.
Companion.
Yeah, the Kung Fu Companion. Again, the link will be in the podcast description, so you can click on that and pick up the book that way.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on, and thank you everybody for listening. We'll be back soon. Bye, everyone.
Direct to video.